Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 creepiest graves ever discovered across the U.S., we descend into the forgotten corners of America's cemeteries, where history rots beneath the soil, and the dead are never quite done with the living. From the glass coffin that weeps in Key West, to the bone well hidden deep in the Texas Hill Country, these are real graves unearthed by chance, sealed in mystery, and whispered about long after midnight. Every account you're about to hear was told by those who dig, restore, or stumble upon what should have stayed buried. Workers, wanderers, and caretakers who've seen things the sun was never meant to touch. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of you listen and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unnerves you, type its name below. Because when the soil settles and the world sleeps, some things buried still find ways to breathe. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I used to think cemeteries were quiet, but that was before I worked night shifts at Key West Cemetery during hurricane season. The city contracts out restoration work when the summer heat starts buckling the old stucco, and the tourists take more pictures than the living should. That's how I ended up there, 34, new to town, burning through savings and pride after a divorce. The job paid better than bartending, and it came with one thing I needed more than money: hours alone where no one expected me to talk about myself. By day, I hauled bags of lime mortar and scrubbed algae off vaults with a stiff brush. By night, I babysat pumps and sandbags whenever a storm stalked the island, making sure the family plots didn't turn into swimming pools. After a few weeks, I could navigate the lanes of whitewashed mausoleums with my eyes shut. The roosters called like off-key alarms. Iguanas slid into the hedges. Lizards watched from sun-baked stones. A cemetery in Key West is a city on stilts, names stacked up into the air because you bury too deep and the water wants them back. The boss was a woman named Alvarez, tough as a conch shell. She had this habit of tapping her pencil in 3s whenever she thought. 3 taps meant you weren't in trouble yet. 6 meant you should stop explaining. Her cousin Danny did most of the heavy lifting with me and had a gift for telling stories just shy of believable. The oldest hand in the place was a groundskeeper everyone called Earl, though I never knew if that was his first or last name. Earl moved slow until lightning was involved. Then he moved like an apology. On my second week, we were clearing brush behind a family vault with a cracked stucco arch when my scraper clicked glass instead of stone. There was a tiny square window high on the door about the size of a paperback, crusted opaque with salt and thyme. I scraped a corner clean like you'd clean a stovetop, careful not to scratch. The glass inside was dark, not because there wasn't light, but because something made it dark. A weird slickness beaded on my scraper and my fingers and didn't quite evaporate in the heat. "Don't touch that," Earl said, from farther away than I remembered him being a second before. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the sky, even though it was blue and punishing. Let it sweat. "It's just condensation," Danny said, grinning, because denial sounds braver when you're in your 20s. "This is the one, isn't it, Earl? With the girl?" Earl gave him the kind of look you give a kid about to put a fork in a socket. "We don't say it out loud. You want the howling at night, you go on down to Duval." Later, under the tin roof by the maintenance shed, Danny told me the story anyway while we drank water that tasted like a garden hose. In the 1920s, during restoration after a hurricane, workers uncovered a glass coffin inside a small private crypt. It was the kind of thing you read about in old medical journals. Sealed panes, metal frame, rubber gasket, an experiment in preserving the dead the way a museum preserves a butterfly. They found a young woman inside, perfectly intact, dark hair and lace collar, hands folded. Real Victorian angel stuff. What spooked them wasn't her condition. It was the grease print of fingers on the underside of the glass. 5 ovals, fogged from within as if she'd pressed her hand up to the lid a century too late. No name, no marker, no permit on file, which meant no official record of her being there at all. The city sealed the crypt and it drifted to rumor. "People say the glass still cries on humid nights," Danny said. "They say you can hear her tapping when there's a storm." "That's not funny," I said, because it wasn't a joke, it was the way his voice changed at the end. He didn't meet my eyes. We didn't go inside that crypt, not right away. We're not stupid. Old structures get touchy if you surprise them. Wood warps, hinges seize, bats decide you've trespassed. We filed a request with the city for permission to examine it. Meanwhile, the weather turned thick and expectant. Like the air had heard gossip. I started waking at 3 a.m. with a film of salt on my tongue. Even on nights I slept in air conditioning. When you live on an island, you accept certain sounds in the dark. The hum of refrigeration, the slap of palm fronds, the sudden scream of a rooster because that's what passes for normal here. What I couldn't accept was the faint, rhythmic tap coming through the window of my apartment. It was so soft I kept mistaking it for a neighbor dropping ice into a glass. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. Like someone thinking. The approval to open the crypt came a week later, on a Friday, with the kind of hurry the city reserves for things it wants quietly done before anyone notices. Alvarez took point. She wore a respirator and gave us all one too. "If the gasket fails, I don't want any of you breathing whatever's in there," she said. No heroics. We document and reseal. She didn't tell the grounds crew what we were opening. Maybe she didn't want to give it a name either. We worked at dawn to avoid the heat and the tourists who like to ask questions that aren't really questions. I held a light while Danny used a slow, patient blade on the old caulk. Alvarez sprayed the metal frame with penetrating oil and wrapped the bolts with a rubber mallet to break up rust. Every sound seemed loud. The crypt was as simple as a closet. Stucco walls, short interior shelf, the window like an eye you couldn't see through. It smelled more like the ocean than like rot. When Alvarez slid the last bolt and put her hands on the frame, her eyes flicked to mine like she was checking whether I'd pray, then nodded to Danny. Together, we eased it open. The door came with a sigh that felt obscene, like finding a diary and reading it anyway. Inside, there was no coffin at all. There was a glass box the size of a person if you were a person trying to lie still forever. Metal frame. Edges caulked with some amber resin. It was clouded from the inside by a dark film, like breath on a cold window. Overhead, a fan we'd set up words, doing nothing. Alvarez raised her camera. "No movement," she said. Not like a command, but like a wish. We approached with our lights low to minimize glare. The blackness inside the glass wasn't complete. It thinned at the edges, enough to show a kind of outline, an oval where a head would be, the impression of fabric at the chest. I don't know what I expected. I'll tell you what I saw. A handprint, 5 pads, and a palm, smeared just enough to look recent. On the inside, Danny made a noise the respirator almost swallowed. Alvarez's camera clicked, and each click was like a step on stairs going down. She kept murmuring details for the record. Location, date, measurements. Her voice steadied me. If you name a thing, it can't surprise you. That's what I wanted to believe. When she asked me to shoot photos from the side, I squatted and shifted left. My knee touched the stucco. Something cold pressed against my shoulder through the fabric of my work shirt. Light as a curious child, I jerked, banging my elbow, and the glass fogged an inch in the corner like an exhale. "Hey," Danny said, more to the crypt than to me. "Don't." We closed up and marked the location for stabilization work. The city didn't want news crews to decide the island had a vampire under discount airfare. Alvarez sealed it with new compound, careful and neat. We left a hair-thin thread under a corner of caulk. A trick, she said, helps you see if anyone messes with your seal. That night, a tropical storm decided to level up mid-Atlantic. By noon Saturday, we were stacking sandbags, loading the pumps onto the flatbed, and texting people we shouldn't because weather makes you honest. By evening, the wind had learned our names and hollered them down Truman Avenue. The cemetery holds history, but not water. It puddles and then it climbs. Alvarez rostered the night, she, Earl, and me to monitor levels and run the pumps, Danny to sleep and come at dawn. "If you hear anything you can't explain," she said, 3 taps of her pencil. "Radio first, investigate second. Don't play ghost hunter." I wore rain gear and still got wet to the bones because the rain came sideways and the air came up from the ground. The lanes shone with standing water and reflected the mausoleums upside down. I set the first pump in the lowest spot near the Catholic section. The hose vomited murky water into the street. The second pump went farther back toward the private crypts. I saved the new one for last, not because I was scared, I told myself, but because I was practical. You check what you know before you risk what you don't. Around midnight, the power blinked side and left. Our headlamps turned the rain into glitter and our breath into fog, though the air was warm as bathwater. I stopped by the maintenance shed to grab extra gas, and when I turned back toward the crypts, I heard it. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. It wasn't the sound of rain on metal or palm on stucco. It was deliberate, like someone trying to get a waiter's attention without making a scene. I stood there in the rain like an idiot until my radio hissed. "Northgate good," Alvarez said. "How's your end?" "Pumps are holding," I said, and then, because lying to someone competent feels worse than fear, "I'm hearing something by the private section. Might be debris." "I'm 10 out," she said. "Earl?" "Copy," Earl said, faint and far. "Keep your head dry." The sound came from the direction of the glass coffin crypt. I sometimes think about the moment I could have turned the other way. We all have those moments, the fork you don't see until after you've swallowed the wrong dinner. The tapping wasn't frantic. It was patient. I'm not proud to write this next part. I followed. Water lapped at my shins by the time I reached the lane where we'd worked that morning. The new caulk on the crypt's door gleamed like a stitched wound. My headlamp threw a shaky oval onto the stucco. Rain hit the metal frame and made a sound like coins poured slow. I wiped my palms on my jeans, then wiped my jeans with my hands because that's how you lose control of an evening. I told myself I should check for leaks. I told myself a lot of things. The thread we'd left under the caulk, our telltale, hung loose, cut clean. I didn't open the door. I swear that to whoever will ever believe me. It was already open a fraction, enough to show blackness like a sleeping animal's mouth. The interior air smelled of salt and lilies, the fake funeral kind. My light slid over the threshold, caught the edge of the glass box, and turned everything white for a second before the fog inside reclaimed the view. Behind me, somewhere in the wind, a rooster crowed like a joke that had gone off the rails. Another set of 3 taps came then, faster, like impatience. It didn't come from the door. It came from the little square window set high in the stucco. I aimed my light at it and saw my own face in the wet glass, pale and bug-eyed in the headlamp halo. The tapping continued. My reflection didn't move its mouth. "Don't," Alvarez said, close enough to startle me into almost falling into the open door. She'd come up without me hearing because the storm had its own conversation. She put a gloved hand on my shoulder and pressed me sideways out of the direct line of the window. "We close it. That's it." Her voice was steady and practical, like recipes. We both stepped toward the door. The handprint inside the glass box bloomed darker, as if new breath condensed there. The tap, tap, tap sounded again, and I swear, it was inside the rhythm of the rain and also apart from it like a different meter. Alvarez set the portable floodlight on the ground and angled it so the interior lit up enough to see forms. A lace collar, the slope of hair, the suggestion of a cheek. If you've ever stared at an ultrasound trying to see the thing everyone else swears is there, you know the feeling. Earl arrived with the air around him. He took one look, swallowed, and pulled a length of rope from his pocket like he'd planned to tie something down. We worked wordlessly to seat the door. The wind shoved back. The pump down the lane coughed, and I mentally calculated how long it would run on the last tank. The floodlight flickered. In the half-second of darkness, I felt a touch on the back of my head where the headlamp strap rested. 2 fingers, affectionate as a mother pushing hair off a forehead. We got the door closed and bolted. The tapping continued once, twice, then stopped. Rain filled the silence like applause for somebody else's performance. Alvarez ran her palm along the new caulk, eyes narrowed. "Which one of you?" she began and let the rest hang, not because she suspected us, but because the sentence didn't have a good end. "Was it you?" Danny asked the next morning, in that careful way men ask their friends if they cried at a movie. He'd shown up early, ears pink, pretending not to scan the newspaper for mention of storm damage. We told him what happened, more honestly than I planned to be because lying would keep us there talking for years. He laughed too loud. Then he drove to the private section and stood in front of the crypt, as if proximity could solve curiosity. I watched from the shade because some part of me had learned. A rooster took off running as if it had been caught cheating. The sun came out like a camera flash, and with it came that scent you only get the morning after a storm. The clean, chemical smell of everything rearranged. The city came on Monday with clipboards. A woman in a linen suit asked us to sign statements. She had a way of looking at the crypt like it was a budget line item. They put up caution tape, not because it helps against anything determined, but because tape soothes people whose job is to soothe. Alvarez got into a fight with a supervisor about preserving historical integrity, which was funny because the only integrity anyone cared about was the integrity of the story. The official line became a conservative mercy, private family vault, unusual artifact inside, no cause for alarm. The glass was not to be opened again. The bolts were reseated with new hardware. The city's records for that family were, say it with me, lost over time. For a while, life resumed the way it does after you refuse to say you saw something that watches you back. We made repairs. We wrote invoices. Tourists took photos in their sun hats while mounted police clopped by and pretended funerary angels were made for Instagram. I tried to fall asleep before 3 a.m. and sometimes managed it. When I did wake, there was no tapping, just the anonymous thrum of air conditioners and far-off traffic that stops being far when you can't rest. Then the humidity came back. It was a Tuesday when I found the first smear on my apartment window. I live in a second-story walk-up over a bait shop that never forgets what it sells. My windows face a side alley that mostly hosts cats and arguments. The smear was a crescent on the inside of the glass at the bottom left corner, about the size of a fingertip, and so faint I had to angle my head to see it. I wiped it with my shirt. It came back by morning, a little higher. There are explanations for everything until there aren't. Moisture condenses, mold blooms. People sleepwalk and touch things and don't admit it because pride keeps secrets. I rubbed the glass with vinegar and left it open to dry. The smear came back as 5 dots in a lazy arc the next night. I moved and rehung my blinds and convinced myself the pattern was different. On Thursday, I heard tapping while brushing my teeth. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. I turned off the faucet and it stopped. I turned it on and it started and I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in weeks because pipes will do that. Old ones that talk to themselves. Friday, Alvarez called me into the office. She had a mug of coffee in both hands like she wasn't sure which to drink. She said the city wanted to shore up the foundation under the private vault. Add drainage so storm surges wouldn't threaten the structure. She wants me on that crew. It would mean nights again for a while. You good? She asked. Yeah, I lied more easily than before. You hear anything? The pencil tapped 3 times on her desk as if she'd started and couldn't help finishing. She shook her head and looked at a spot on the wall like a stain only she could see. We'll do it quick, she said. Quietly. No heroics. That night I woke at 3 a.m. The window was fogged from the inside as though I'd been leaning against it breathing for an hour. I thought of the glass box and how the fog thinned at the edges. I thought of the way the handprint had bloomed, not as a show but as a reflex. I touched the pane. It was cold, colder than the room, colder than the night. My reflection wasn't crisp enough to trust. I waited for the tapping and told myself not to. Outside, a rooster crowed and caught itself, embarrassed, as if it had stepped on a rake. The tapping didn't come. I exhaled slow, and in my breath another handprint formed on the glass, overlapping mine but not matching the size. There are several ways to end a story. You can close the door and trust bolts you no longer enjoy touching. You can tell yourself it was a misunderstanding. Old seals and hurricane breath, pipes and wishful fear. You can sell your lease and move inland to where the dead stay dry. Or you can do what I've been doing. Write it down, set it somewhere people can see, and pretend the act of saying it keeps it from becoming something else. We went back under the crypt 2 nights later with shovels and a scoped camera to inspect the foundation. The water table was high and the ground tried to drink us. The lens showed dark pockets where the soil had voided, coils of old roots hugging nothing. It also showed something that shouldn't have been there. A second glass surface below the first, tilted at an angle, a broken corner like a ragged tooth. The picture was grainy, but you could see the smear of a palm at that broken edge, sliding downward thinner than a human should be. That's a trick of refraction, the city engineer said behind us too quickly. Light plays in glass, nobody said otherwise. We filled the void with a slurry that set like stone. We stabilized what we could. We came back up and closed the hatch. When the air is thick as a held breath and you can taste salt on your wrists, I still hear the taps sometimes. Sometimes it's the bait shop sign clacking against its chain. Sometimes it's my upstairs neighbor setting a glass too hard on her counter. Sometimes if you stand in my living room at 3 a.m. and don't breathe, it's a small patient sound from the window. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Like someone reminding me they're still thinking. Like someone asking if I remember. Earl retired without ceremony a month later. He left his rope and a note in the shed that said in careful old man cursive, "You can close your eyes, but it doesn't stop your ears." Danny moved up to day supervisor and started wearing a wide brim hat like a cowboy in a movie who had learned his lesson. Alvarez keeps a set of keys no one else has to the private crypt and moves with even more purpose than before, as if purpose is the only antidote to stories. People still tour the cemetery. They still take photos of angels and plaques that say things like, "I told you I was sick." They walk past the small, white crypt with the new caulk and the neat bolts and never notice the way the stucco sweats even when the rest of the wall stays dry. I do not stop them or tell them to look. The city doesn't like employees who act like docents for what it would prefer to be rumor. If you stand there on a humid afternoon, you might see a stain on the little window that looks like a mark left by a human hand. If you come during a storm, you might hear the sound of rain pretending to be fingers. If you come at dawn, the fog might move in a way you don't expect, from inside to out. If you live here long enough, the dead stop being a pity in old photographs and start being neighbors, who sometimes need you to carry something heavy for them without asking questions. I try not to touch glass anymore. That's a weird sentence until you've read this far, but there it is. I wipe mirrors with a cloth and keep my face a little off to the side. I hold my phone gingerly when the screen fogs because I've learned it can fog on the wrong side if you look too long. I avoid aquariums and souvenir cases and tourist bars with walls of liquor bottles backlit like stained glass. It's not superstition. It's courtesy. There are people you don't call after midnight. There are pains you don't press on, even if the other side looks empty. I'm writing this because it's humid tonight, and my window just misted over, and I'd like to believe an audience of strangers can make something less personal. The roosters will start soon, and someone on Duval will laugh too hard at the wrong joke and the island will keep moving. Because that's what islands do. They pretend they're anchored while the tides rearrange them a grain at a time. I can hear the faintest sound now, barely there, not even a knock. Maybe it's in the pipes, maybe it's the air, maybe it's me. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, I won't answer. I don't have to. I already did once. I'm not the kind of person who chases ghost stories. I work night shifts at a distribution center. I drink my coffee black and keep my head down. The older I get, the more I like practical things. A clean windshield, a flashlight with fresh batteries, cash in a glove compartment for tolls. So if you're reading this expecting demons or exorcisms, that's not my lane. What I have is a trip, a grave, and a sound that followed me home. This started last October when my cousin Tyler invited me to Athens, Ohio. He was finishing a graduate program at the university and said the leaves were peak insane, which I guess is how people who read a lot of poetry describe fall. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years and he kept texting, "Come down. You need a break." I had 5 nights off in a row and an old Honda that can do long miles if you talk nice to it. I left at dawn with a thermos and a bag of beef jerky and rolled into Athens by late afternoon. All those hills pitching the road up and down like a slow roller coaster. Tyler lived in a skinny blue house a block off a quiet street lined with parked cars and maples. He came out in a hoodie and hugged me like I'd crossed an ocean. We grabbed burritos from a window on Court Street and walked the campus while he pointed out where he taught discussion sections and where townies went to drink when they wanted to avoid the undergrads. The wind had that wet coal smell you only get in river towns, and you could feel the season tilting toward Halloween. Pumpkins on porches, orange flyers stapled to light poles for haunted hayrides, the whole thing. I didn't sleep well that first night. New pillow, creaking house, wind in the trees, any excuse. But if I'm honest, it was something else. You know that brittle feeling you get in a strange place? Like everything is quiet in a way that isn't empty exactly, just attentive. That's how Athens felt to me. The next day, Tyler had meetings in office hours. He tossed me his key and suggested I check out the river path or the farmer's market. Or if you want the spooky Athens thing, he added, there's that old cemetery on West State, people talk about a grave there. Then he laughed and waved his hand like, hey, college town myths. The Screaming Grave, he said like it was a craft beer, I'd never heard of it. He told me the name, Margaret Shanks, mid-1800s, pronounced dead after a fever and buried. But the mourners later heard cries from underground. When they dug her up, the story goes, there were scratches on the inside of the coffin lid. Her family supposedly reburied her with a string tied to her wrist and a bell above ground, safe if she woke, and the bell went missing sometime in the 1900s. People say if you stand there on a cold night, you can hear the chain moving underfoot. I made a face, but it stuck with me. Not because I believed it, because it's exactly the kind of story that makes practical people like me feel sick. It doesn't ask you to believe in ghosts. It asks you to believe in human error. I did the farmer's market. I walked the river. I had coffee in a ceramic mug in a cafe where everybody was grading papers or pretending to. When Tyler texted at 4 to say he was freed up, I asked if he'd take me to the cemetery. He sent a skull emoji, which I forgave. West State Street Cemetery sits back from the road behind a line of trees. The gate is iron. The paths inside are narrow and slope over the natural contour of the hill, and the stones are a mix. Upright tablets, shoulder-high obelisks, the occasional block with a family name. It wasn't sunset yet, but the light felt thin. We walked between rows while Tyler talked about the university's history and how half the town believes every building has a ghost story. He mentioned the Ridges, the old asylum on the hill, but caught my face and steered away from that topic. "Here," he said finally, pointing at a low stone I might have missed. "This is it." The headstone was not impressive. Waist-high, roughened by weather, with a name carved in a hand that looked more careful than skilled, Margaret Shanks. The dates were nearly gone. 1863 was the only number I could read without guessing. But what stopped me wasn't the name or the date. It was the crack. The headstone was split clean down the center, a thin seam that widened toward the base as if something had pushed from within. I know stones crack. Ice expands, roots pry, everything falls apart if you let it. But this looked too neat, too deliberate. I knelt and touched the seam. It was cold the way metal is cold. Tyler, sensing he'd done his duty as a faux campus tour guide, started on a series of jokes about Victorian burial practices and selling bracelets made from coffin screws. I half listened, half studied the grass at my knees. There was a shallow depression in the turf beginning at the headstone and running a few feet toward the path, like the ground had been a while back and then settled again. A thin length of something dark, twine wire, protruded 2 inches out of the soil beside the stone and then disappeared back in. I almost plucked it like a weed, but thought better of it. We left before full dark. A woman in a red beanie walked a beagle down one of the paths and some freshmen cut through on bikes. Normal, mundane living world stuff. I told myself to let it go. That night we met some of Tyler's friends at a bar whose ceiling was crowded with old farm tools. That's when I heard the story again. Fuller, one of his friends, Dee, volunteers at the Historical Society. She wears big round glasses and laughs with her whole face. When I mentioned the cemetery, she perked up like I'd said the magic word. She told me the version she knew. Margaret's fever, her death, the quick burial, the noises, the exhumation, the scratches. She added a detail I hadn't heard. According to a second-hand diary entry preserved in the Society's files, when they lifted the lid, her mouth and nostrils had dirt in them. I asked if the diary was legit. Dee shrugged. "It's Athens. Stories here are like brickwork. They hold up houses, but everyone is a little off." She said if we wanted, she could show us files the next day, a small collection of clippings and typed sheets about premature interments. When she said that phrase, I felt the kind of internal recoil you usually save for slipping on black ice. Back at Tyler's, we fell asleep watching some British show where people buy junk at flea markets and invent a story to sell it. I woke at 3:12 a.m. to a noise I still don't feel brave describing without hedging. It was the sound of a bell, not a clear church bell. Not a phone. A little metal bell. A trill you would use to call a dog or summon a clerk. It sounded once, short and high, maybe from the kitchen or the back porch, and then it was gone. Silence opened behind it like the space after someone says your name. I lay there with my eyes open, then told myself it was a dream. I lay there repeating the practical mantra I used for thunderstorms and strange hotel hallways. It's nothing. It's something normal. It's nothing. In the morning, I didn't mention it. Tyler made eggs. We met Dee at the Historical Society, a brick building with that stale paper, clean dust smell like the inside of a locked drawer. She took us to a table stacked with thin folders. It wasn't just Margaret. There were national clippings about safety coffins with air tubes and flags, about burial bells with tripwires, about doctors who argued for longer waits before pronouncing death in fever cases. One photocopied page held a list of names from Ohio alone whose graves, for one reason or another, had belts and strings running to the surface. Dee said, People were terrified of waking up in a coffin after cholera or scarlet fever. They were trying to protect themselves from their own medicine and their own mistakes. Tyler found the folder with Margaret's name. It wasn't thick. There was a typed sheet summarizing the story, and a grainy black and white photo, probably from the 1970s, of the headstone before it cracked. In the photo, a short metal shepherd's hook stood near the stone. From it hung a small bell. I stared at the bell. Either the photographer had staged it or the bell had still been present then. Dee leaned over my shoulder and said, "That's the picture that messes people up." The bell disappeared. No one knows how or why. It was already gone when I was a kid coming here on field trips. Someone stole it, Tyler said, practical as ever. Dee considered that. Maybe. Or maybe the family took it. Or maybe it just rusted off. Or maybe it's still down there. Down there, I repeated before I could help myself. That night, the bar crowd was louder. A football game lit up every TV. We had pizza at a place with a mechanical horse in the corner. I told myself the bell sound was a dream and that my brain was making connections it wanted to make. When Tyler crashed, I lay on the couch with the TV on mute and listened to the house. Old wood settles. Ductwork flexes. A cat outside takes personal offense at the existence of possums. Around 2 a.m., just as I dozed, I heard the bell again. 2 notes, quick. A tinkle more than a ring. Like somebody flicked the rim with a finger. The sound came from the kitchen this time. Not the back porch. I sat up and waited for the second round of courage to arrive, then stood and walked barefoot across Tyler's living room floor. The kitchen looked the way all kitchens look at night. Familiar but wrong, like a stage set once the actors leave. My phone flashlight reflected off the stove, the single window over the sink. Then something brushed my ankle. I jerked like I'd been shocked, stepped back, and hit the trash can with my heel. The lid flapped and clattered, and then I realized what had touched me. A slim length of something that had been trailing across the floor from beneath the sink. Fishing line? No, it wasn't plastic. I knelt and pinched it. It was old twine, stained brown. The kind you use to bind something once and never unbind it. It ran under the sink cabinet, through a small gap at the corner where the baseboard didn't meet. On the other side of the cabinet, the twine trailed across the tile to the back door and stopped under the threshold. It wasn't long enough to go outside. It just ended. I followed it with my fingers, not sure why, and found the last 8 inches were worn smooth as if drawn through a fist many times. The bell didn't ring again. I woke Tyler and showed him the twine. He said it must have fallen from a high shelf or a drawer. I showed him the gap under the sink and he said a previous tenant probably strung something there to hang garlic or to keep a cabinet closed and it got trapped. I told him it didn't reach the door and he said, "Still sleepy, cranky now." "Then it's not a bell string, man." We went back to bed. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, he had class. I had nothing but time. I walked back to the cemetery. It's important to say this. It was not cold that afternoon. The sun was out and kids were taking pictures under a maple, whose leaves had gone that neon red that looks fake on Instagram. But when I reached Margaret's stone and stood at the crack, it felt like I had stepped from sunlight into shade. That is not a metaphor. I felt a temperature drop that made the thin hairs on my forearms lift. I listened. You can't write about listening without sounding corny. I'll try. Trees have a sound, birds, a distant road, the far voice of someone cajoling a reluctant dog. I heard all that, and under it so faint I had to hold my breath to separate it from wind. Metal against metal. Not a bell. A chain being moved below something heavy. Stop-start. A pull, then slack. I took out my phone and hit record. I let it run for a full minute. When I stopped it, I said out loud because it felt polite, "I'm sorry for this." I don't know to whom. On the way out, I saw a groundskeeper in a green jacket adjusting flowers on a different grave. I asked him about Margaret, coming at it sideways the way you do when you don't want to sound like a tourist eager for ghost dust. He said like it was only barely worth the breath. "I hear a lot of stories. People come at night and mess around. We lock the gates. We try to keep it respectful. Rocks crack and people tell themselves things. That's all." His name stitched over his jacket. Breast red Blakely. He had eyes like a man who prefers to fix the mower himself rather than pay a shop. I didn't mean to be the kind of person who sneaks into cemeteries at night. But I'd heard the bell. Twice I'd seen the twine. I'd recorded something. And I wanted to be rational. The nightmare of any rational person is not ghosts. It's being wrong in broad daylight. I went back that night with Tyler. He brought a flask to keep it light, and I brought a decent flashlight and my phone. We waited until after 9. The houses nearby had lights on, some with TVs strobing the windows blue. A breeze moved through the trees like soft applause. The gate wasn't locked, but it squeaked the way gates do solely to make accomplices of you and your guilt. Inside the fence, the paths were darker than they'd been by day. It's strange to move among names you don't know while you can feel people you do know, breathing somewhere else. Margaret's grave looked smaller at night. The headstone's crack held shadow, and the grass depression looked darker than the ground around it, like a stain. Tyler talked until he realized I wasn't listening. He laughed and said, "Okay, fine, we're listening for the metal ghost bell." I elbowed him. We stood a little apart without agreeing to, because people standing too close for too long in a place like that isn't friendly or romantic. It's conspiratorial. I set my phone on a flat stone nearby and started recording. I planted my feet on either side of the crack like I was straddling a narrow stream. I made myself breathe slow. An owl called from somewhere over the middle of the cemetery. 2 cars passed out on West State. A minute. 2. There's a point during silence where your own heartbeat becomes a problem. It's not loud, but you start hearing it as if somebody else could too. That's where I was when something shifted under my soles. Not much, the tiniest give. Like standing on a trampoline with a single slow breath moving under the surface. The grass didn't move. The stone didn't move. But something under us, soil, coffin, tree root, settled an imperceptible fraction and then held still again. Tyler took a step back and whispered, "Dude." He was smiling and not smiling. We listened so hard it hurt. Then the chain, it was closer than in the afternoon. The sound had body to it now. A small weight dragging across metal or wood, then a pause, then the jingle of a short run of links when they met resistance. And under it, this is the part I know people will argue with, under it I heard a sound I have only ever heard from 2 places, new baby animals and very old human throats. A low airless effort, the echo of a word without breath behind it, not speech. The intention to make speech, Tyler said, too loud. That's someone messing with us. We swung the flashlight in a slow circle. The light made the stones leap close and then fall away. No one. When we aimed the beam down by our shoes, the pale grass shone and the crack in the stone was a slice of black. The ground did not look different from ground. We waited another minute, 2, and nothing. The chain sound did not come again. We were turning to leave when my phone, still recording on that flat stone, chimed, the tone I use for a text. Except my phone was in airplane mode. I'd put it that way on purpose for the recording, to keep notifications from ruining it. The chime went off again and then the screen lit, even though it had been face down. When I picked it up, the screen was on the voice recording app. It had saved my file mid-recording, given it a name all by itself, letters and numbers, and started a new file called simply Bells. Tyler swore and took a step back. He looked up at the sky like he expected a PA system to drop and someone to say, "You're on a show." I ended the new recording, hands shaking. We walked out, neither of us talking. Back at the house, we played the files. The first one, the day recording, was a wash of wind and a few guessable noises. But at the 37-second mark, there was a sound that wasn't wind or birds or traffic. I won't describe it. I'll say this instead. When we played it on Tyler's kitchen speaker, the cabinet under the sink made a soft answering thud. Maybe the bass resonated. That's what Tyler said. He said it 3 times. Then the second file, the one the phone named on its own, was almost empty. Silence. And at the very end, one light ring like the bell at a hotel desk. We slept in the same room after that. 2 grown men, the kind of sleeping that is more staring than rest. I know I slept because I dreamed I was in the cemetery and my hands were under the grass, palms up, and someone was trying to pass me something small and cold with a chain attached. I said in the dream, "I don't want it. Please don't give it to me." And the voice, not a voice, a shape like a voice, said, "Take it anyway." I drove home the next day. It felt like retreat. Tyler hugged me quickly, backed away like he wanted to make a joke about haunted house sleepovers and couldn't quite find it. I told him he could keep the files as if they were something you could possess safely, and he said he'd send them to Dee because she would be excited. He texted me while I was still on the freeway asking if I'd grabbed my charger from under his couch. I hadn't. He said he'd mail it. 3 days later, the package arrived. It was heavier than a charger. There was no return address, only my name and the postmark from Athens. Inside, wrapped in paper towels, was my charger. And under it, rolled tight inside a second wad of paper towel, was a bell. I don't know how to explain this without sounding like I'm staging it. 30 years old and practical, and I sat at my kitchen table and unwrapped a little iron bell like it was a snake. It wasn't shiny. It was dull and dark and mottled like a thing that had been outside a long time. There was no clapper inside. Instead, the little loop where the clapper would hang had been bent into a narrow crook, and someone had tied a length of old twine to it. The twine was short, a foot at most, and it ended in a frayed end that was worn smooth. There was a note in the box. It wasn't Tyler's handwriting. It was cramped and careful, like someone trying not to be recognized when recognition was unlikely anyway. It said, "This belongs to you now." It was not signed. I called Tyler. He swore he didn't send it. He swore he hadn't told anyone my address. He texted Dee while I was on the phone. She replied with a question mark and then a minute later a message that said, "Please don't bring it here, please." The bell sat on my table like a found tooth. I put it in a drawer. I moved it to the garage. I moved it to the trunk of my car. Each place made me feel like I had placed something in a babysitter's hands and then walked away too fast. A week later I heard it. I was doing dishes. My window looks out at a maple tree and a parking lot light that buzzes when the humidity is high. The radio was on low. The bell rang from somewhere behind me. Not a bright ringing, more like a hiccup of metal, an attempt. I shut off the water and stood dripping, my hands wet to the wrist, and listened. I didn't touch the drawer it was in. I didn't want to confirm. The bell rang again, and this time it was lower, almost a scrape. I took a breath that tasted like old pennies. I moved it to a box and put the box in a storage unit across town. I felt better for 2 nights. On the 3rd night, my upstairs neighbor texted to ask if I was doing something with bells, which is not a phrase anyone should ever have to type. I told him no. He said it was probably the wind hitting someone's chimes. I said probably, and then we both let the conversation die of natural causes. I didn't put this on the internet, this little account, until almost a year later because I wanted to wait and see if it faded. Most things do. Stories lose their heat. Objects return to being objects. But the thing I've learned is that some stories are patient. They don't want to scare you all at once. They want to insinuate. They want to become the explanation you reach for when you can't justify the dread you're feeling otherwise. A month after I put the bell in the storage unit, I went back to Athens. I didn't tell Tyler until I was already in town because I knew he would try to make it into a day trip and jokes and lunch at a place with a chalkboard menu. That would have been better, probably. Instead, I went alone. The cemetery was almost empty. A man walked along the lowest path with his hands clasped behind his back like something out of an old painting. A girl in a bright running jacket cut through near the gate. I found Margaret's stone and stood in the place I'd stood before. The crack had widened. I can't swear to that. Maybe I wanted it to have widened, but it looked wide enough now to press a nickel into if you wanted to wedge one there for luck. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind, the road, the rustle, and then, faint but closer than I remembered, the tiny scrape and pull I could feel in the lower bones of my face. I followed it with my ears down into the ground the way you might follow a thread with your fingers when your hand is in a dark bag. I waited to feel stupid, and I didn't. I felt something else. I felt the natural order of things tilt a degree toward an empty chair. The groundskeeper, Blakely, came up the path. He didn't pretend not to see me. He stopped 10 feet away, took off his cap, wiped his forehead with his wrist, and said, polite but unsmiling, "You from town?" "No," I said. "I just heard about this grave." He nodded. He looked like he was deciding whether to tell a stranger on a Tuesday afternoon that he had once seen something he couldn't unsee. He gestured at the headstone with his chin. "I don't love the way people talk about this one," he said. "Like it's a sideshow. People died hard back then. People die hard now. They want it to be a trick." But he stopped. He put his cap back on. "You should be careful what you bring with you," he said finally. "Sometimes what you bring thinks you're bringing it home." He walked on. I watched him go, his green jacket bright against the gray stones. I looked down. The depression in the grass looked deeper. That night in the motel, I didn't stay with Tyler. I did not want to bring whatever I might be to his door. The bell didn't ring. I dreamed of a room with no windows, but the dream didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a place to be left alone. When I woke, my phone had saved a new voice memo on its own. That's not something it had done since that first night. The file name was a sequence of numbers that included in the middle the digits 1863. That's probably something people reading this will shout about. Numbers do what they want, and the human brain plays with them like blocks, I know. I opened the file anyway. The recording was mostly static, then the hum of a cheap motel fridge. At the end there was the faintest rattle, like a chain being lifted link by link, and then a sound exactly like the one you get when you try to say a word through a handful of dirt. I deleted it. That's the only thing I've done out of panic in this whole account. I deleted it and then emptied the recently deleted folder and then put my phone under the faucet and turned the water on, and then remembered at the last second that I can't afford to buy a new phone. I stood there like an idiot holding a glass rectangle over running water while the bell, impossible, ridiculous, rang once from the dresser drawer where I had put my socks. I'm back home now. The storage unit is paid through December. I haven't visited it. I haven't told anyone else about the package. Tyler texted me a picture last week of a chalkboard sign outside a bar. Happy Halloween. Be nice to your ghosts. He added 3 bell emojis and a crying, laughing face, and then, after a few minutes, a heart. Sometimes when I'm making coffee in the morning, I hear a sound like a chain slid across the bottom of an empty sink. It might be my upstairs neighbor's dog collar against the floor, even though I have never seen him walk a dog. It might be air in the pipes. It might be the way old houses rehearse their failures. There is a spot on my kitchen floor by the baseboard near the pantry where the tile grout has cracked. It's only an inch long. The crack is straight, too straight for something poured by hand, and I could probably pry it wider with a butter knife if I wanted to make myself miserable. I don't want that. Some mornings I catch myself standing with one foot on each side of it listening. The line is so fine you can't see it unless you're looking for it. That's the worst kind of line. If you go to Athens and stand by Margaret's stone, you will probably hear nothing. You will see a crack and tell yourself the true things about ice and roots and time. You will be right. I hope you go during the day. I hope you are with someone you like. I hope you don't set your phone down on any flat stones. If you do, and if it saves a file named for what you are secretly hoping you won't hear, don't open it. Throw it away, delete it. Put your practical hands in your practical pockets and walk out through the iron gate into air that has not belonged to anyone yet. And if you ever receive a package without a name, not heavy but heavier than it should be, don't open it at the kitchen table. Don't unwrap it like a gift. Don't pick up what somebody else put down because they couldn't hold it anymore. Let it ring for them. Let it ring for Margaret. Let it ring under someone else's floor. I'm not posting this to scare anyone. I'm posting it because I don't know what else to do. If I keep it to myself, I don't sleep. If I say it out loud to people I know, it sounds like I'm trying to sell a ghost story. If you've ever worked on a small documentary, you know the feeling. Weeks of driving in cheap motels, one weird lead after another, and then something that sticks under your skin and won't get out. This started last May outside Fallon, Nevada. I'm an audio tech. My friend Tyler runs a tiny YouTube channel where he plays tour guide to strange places. He's charismatic in a dad jokes and denim jacket kind of way. Our producer is Maya, who keeps us alive with checklists and granola bars. We've done abandoned hospitals, a concrete dinosaur park, and a motel where the decor hasn't changed since 1979. The plan this time was a short piece about desert oddities, the kind of content that gets 1 million views when the thumbnail is dusty and the title says something like, "We found a cursed grave." We had a lead from an archivist in Reno, an old newspaper blurb about a prospector who in 1952 found a small grave outlined with quartz stones a few miles east of Fallon. Inside it was an infant wrapped in rotting silk. The paper said the body looked wrong, with a jaw that ran too long and eye sockets set back like 2 thumbs pressed hard into clay. Scientists took a sample to a lab. The lab burned down that night. No remains in the ashes. Nobody was charged, nobody found, end of story. Just a circle of stones left in the sand. I would have written it off as urban legend if not for the librarian's throwaway comment at the end of the call. The circle's still out there. Kids drink there and dare each other to stand inside it. Police won't say it on record, but they avoid that wash after dark. Because of the humming, we laughed at that. A grave that hums? Sure. Still, Tyler's eyes lit up in that way they do when he can smell a thumbnail. A circle of quartz in the middle of nowhere, he said. Golden hour shots, big sky. If nothing else, we get a good opener. We rolled into Fallon just before noon on a Tuesday. You can smell the alfalfa fields before you see them. We grabbed lunch at a place with sticky menus and perfect fries. The waitress saw our gear and asked what we were filming. Tyler told her the short version. She looked at Maya, not him, and said softly, "You don't want that somewheres, not with wind like this." Then she took our plates and left before we could ask what she meant. The first weird thing happened when we asked for directions. We had coordinates from a scanned topo map, but they were rough. The guy at the gas station, the one who keeps the Marlboros behind glass and watches everyone like he's counting, made a face when I pointed at the printout. "That wash floods," he said. "Killed a horse last year. Roads turn to soup. You get stuck out there and no one's coming until morning." "We'll be careful," Tyler said, and the guy shrugged. Then he leaned forward and tapped my map with a dirty fingernail. "There's a cemetery north of town, veterans. If you want graves, go film those. They've got flags." He handed back the paper like it stung him. Maya squeezed my arm when we got outside. "It's fine," she said under her breath. "We get some B-roll, and if the site's not there, we cut it. Don't overthink gas station superstitions." The road went from asphalt to cracked asphalt to dirt, with the kind of confidence only Western roads have. Sagebrush, sun, a horizon that makes you feel small even if you're not the anxious type. The wind came in stiff bursts that shook the car and carried that hot metallic smell you get around dry riverbeds. We tracked the wash by the pale strip of sand and a line of cottonwoods that would be green in a few weeks. We found the stones by accident. There were beer cans and tire tracks around a flat spot where the wash widened. Kids had been out here recently. The quartz wasn't dramatic, just fist-sized white stones half buried in a circle about 8 feet across. You could miss it if the light hit wrong. Maya walked around it, squinting. "No marker," she said. "No grave goods. Just rocks. Stand inside it," Tyler said. "We'll do a quick beat to camera. No spooky voice, just the facts." He went into host mode. Easy smile, casual posture, just enough seriousness to make you think this stupid circle might matter. I clipped a lav to his jacket and scanned with my boom. The wind was a mess. I set a low-cut filter and reminded myself that nobody notices audio unless it's bad. We did 3 takes. The wind kept swallowing his lines. On the 4th, something changed. I didn't catch it then because I was listening for pops, but later, back at the motel when I scrubbed through the day, I heard it. A thread under the wind, high and thin. If you've ever heard a baby humming to itself, that mindless, self-soothing up and down, you know the shape of it. That's what it sounded like. Except it was coming from everywhere at once, like the wind learned a tune and forgot most of it. We didn't hear it with our ears. We only caught it on the recorder. Before we left, Tyler did the thing he always does at dump sites like this to build story. He took 1 stone from the circle, held it up to the camera and said, "We'll bring this back before we go. Don't all me." Then he dropped it in his pocket. Maya opened her mouth to say something and then shut it with a tiny shake of her head. On the drive back into town, the car filled with that hot dust smell you get after you've been somewhere you weren't invited. I put my hand out the window and felt the wind skim my fingers like a dog's tongue. We joked about curses because that's what you do. "Here's the twist," Tyler said. "We get back to the motel and the stone's polished into a pearl. Or worse, nothing happens and the comments roast us." The motel was one of those L-shaped places where the sign buzzes and the ice machine looks like a prop. We got 2 adjoining rooms so we could run cables between them. While Maya sorted the day's shots, I washed my hands and watched the sand circle the sink like tiny fish. That's when the second weird thing happened. I reached for my toothbrush and a small white pebble rolled off the plastic, wrapped around the handle and plinked into the sink. I hadn't put a pebble there. It was the same size as the quartz at the wash, but more translucent, like the inside of a cheap geode. I held it in my palm and for a second it felt warm. Not hot, like it had been in sunlight and pocketed. I called through the door. "Ty, did you mess with my toothbrush?" "Dude, what?" he said. I did not. Maya came to the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "You track sand everywhere," she said, then saw the stone and stopped. "Okay, that's not sand." Tyler clapped once and did a mock spooky voice. The desert follows you home. He grinned, then looked at it too long. Put it with mine, he said. We'll get a shot of returning them tomorrow. We were still laughing when our neighbor started fighting with someone on speakerphone. Thin motel walls carry everything. This guy had that back-of-the-throat anger you can smell. He kept saying, did you hear that? Do you hear it? And whoever he was talking to kept hanging up on him and he kept calling back. At one point he said, clear as day, it sounds like a baby. It's in the vent. And I think all three of us froze. Maya went to her bag and pulled out a baby monitor. She and her older sister swap gear when they visit. The monitor is one of those cheap Wi-Fi cameras you prop near the crib. It has a microphone sensitive enough to pick up a yawn. Maya set it on the table as a joke and paired it to her phone. Don't, I said. We do not need to go fishing for... It's for the video, she said, and pointed the lens toward the motel's bathroom vent. Tyler filmed her doing it. If you watch our channel, you can probably guess his narration. Sometimes you have to let the tools listen for you. We ordered pizza. We watched a game on mute. Every once in a while, the monitor app would flicker where the waveform lives. Wind, maybe. Traffic on 50. Around midnight, when you expect noisy nights to die, the waveform rose and fell like a slow breath. No audio, just movement. It would tick up, pause, tick down. Like lullaby tempo, I recorded from the app into my laptop. It's hard to explain what it did to the room. The way silence got heavy. Even Tyler stopped talking. He touched the quartz in his pocket without taking it out. Maya got a text from the librarian. Found microfiche, it said. Come early. Around 1, the monitor finally gave us sound. It wasn't a cry. No sharp edges. It was a tune you sing without words. The mic on those things isn't great, but what came through was too clean. The pitch was high but not piercing. It did that flat little bounce between two notes kids do when they calm themselves. It made my back go cold because it didn't match anything else in the room. The AC was off. The ice machine had quit. Outside was a long, low highway quiet. And in our chest, at least in mine, the sound slotted into something old. The part of your brain that turns at a baby noise even in a crowded bar. The part that goes, that matters. We listened until the app stuttered and crashed. When it came back, the live view was empty. A black square with a tiny green dot in the corner. In the next room, our neighbor's TV clicked off and I heard closet hangers scrape. I slept in 2 bursts of 30 minutes and woke up with sand in my teeth. That sand detail is probably just me being dramatic, but I swear I tasted grit. The next morning, the librarian, whose name was Ruth and whose cardigan made me think of kindergarten, set us up with a clanking machine that made the library smell like warm plastic. She found the article we'd already seen, then one we hadn't, a short follow-up about the lab fire. A student night watchman said he saw a man enter with a small bundle wrapped in cloth, like a baby or a roast chicken. He confessed this after the fire. He went to jail. He died 10 years later. No one claimed the remains. There was also a letter to the editor from a woman who lived near the wash. She wrote that she had heard the desert sing a baby song since she was a girl. That men who took stones fell asleep and woke up with their mouths open and dry like dunes. That her brother said the wind in that cut had teeth. In a neat line at the bottom, the editor added that the county sought funding to put a cyclone fence around the site, and then, in pencil later, someone had written, denied. As we packed up, Ruth asked us to turn our gear off and followed us to the door. She spoke in a low, fast whisper in the tiled entryway where her co-workers wouldn't hear. Don't go at night, she said. I know you will because you're young and that's what youth is for. But if you must, don't leave the circle open. If you picked up one of the stones, put it back where you found it. Don't stand inside with your head uncovered. And if you hear anything you think you recognize, go the other way. A thing that never had language will borrow yours, we promised. Then we didn't keep it. We went back to the wash in late afternoon because that's when the light makes everything look important. The wind had shifted. It came up the wash now, running cool and quick, and the cottonwoods whispered like gossip. Tyler hit his mark, the circle over his shoulder. Maya framed it wide, clean horizon, the kind of shot people screenshot and make wallpapers out of. I ran a long XLR out of the car so we didn't get interference. On the second take, the hum showed up again. I felt it before I heard it, a pressure behind my nose, a feeling like I needed to swallow. In the headphones, it was clearer. The same 2 notes, a little higher this time, rolling in slow loops. I took one ear off and listened to the air. Nothing, back on, there it was. I spun my mic, wondering if it was some directional trick. The hum didn't pan. I could have pointed the mic into the trunk and I think it would have been the same. Maya lowered her camera and said, "Tie your mouth," and Tyler froze. He had been talking, easy and rhythmic. His host voice that always sounds like he's confiding in you. Somewhere in there, without noticing, he'd dropped his jaw too far. Not unhinged, just a weirdly open slack like he'd been at the dentist too long. He closed it with effort and winced. "Popped," he said. "I'm fine." He reached into his pocket and rolled the stolen quartz in his fingers. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. We all knew it was there. We got what we needed and headed toward the car. That should be the end of this. A weird hum you can chalk up to a cable, a jaw pop you can blame on talking too big, a waitress who doesn't like tourists. But across the wash between us and the road, flapped a ribbon caught on a low branch. Not a plastic bag, not caution tape. Silk, or what was left of it, browned and stiff, then in places pure and soft like it had been tucked away from time. The wind pulled it straight and it made a sound I'd never heard a cloth make. A tight little thrumming like a guitar string too thick. Tyler, because he's the kind of person who thinks he's gentle with old things and sometimes is, plucked the ribbon down. It disintegrated more than it tore. A strip remained in his hand, and for a second every fly in the wash took off and hung in the air like seeds. "We should leave that," Maya said. "For B-roll," Tyler said automatically, his voice smaller, and then he dropped it. The piece that touched the sand went dark like water had run through it. He wiped his fingers on his jeans. A pickup rolled up from the roadside. Single driver, old face under a hat bleached past brand names. He cut his engine and leaned out the window. "You kids going to sleep out here?" he said. "No," Maya said. "We're done. We're leaving." He nodded like that was the right answer. "Good," he said. "You camp anywhere else tonight and the wind is just wind." Then he pulled a U-turn in the gravel and went away like we'd imagined him. We should have listened. We didn't. Back at the motel, the monitor app showed nothing. No waveform rise and fall. No phantom breath. I told myself we were wound up. The quartz stones sat on the nightstand. Tyler filmed them, said a few lines about folklore, then turned the camera toward me for an audio guy explains the hum bit. I tried to be cute. I said words like resonance and aeolian, as if I was teaching a class. That's when the app, which I had forgotten to close, lit up. The green dot bloomed into a little pulsing coin. Maya froze, phone halfway to her ear. She didn't press the audio feed button. None of us wanted to. The monitor, in a low bitrate hiccup, said, and then, and then a slow, gentle, the kind of sound you make when you rock something small. We didn't sleep. At 3, the neighbor in the next room packed and left. We listened to his engine idle like he couldn't will himself to go. And then he did, tires whispering out to 50. At 4, the AC kicked on by itself and the vent rattled twice. At dawn, when the sky is the color of dishwater and your body forgets how to be tired, Tyler said, "We put them back." He said it like a confession. He meant the stones. We drove out in the gray light. The wash looked bigger in the morning, a pale tongue in a dark mouth. The circle was where we'd left it. I half expected it to be disturbed, but it held. Tyler knelt, set both quartz on the sand and nudged them with 2 fingers into line with the others. He didn't cross the ring. He didn't stand in it. He whispered, "Sorry," and I pretended not to hear. On the way back to the car, I counted my steps because that sometimes helps. 12, 13, 14. I looked up and the car wasn't where I'd left it. It was to my right. That sentence doesn't make sense if you imagine a real place. You have to imagine that space itself turned a lazy degree while I looked at my feet. The car was not closer or farther. It was the same distance away, but shifted. Like a slideshow slide clicking crooked into place. Maya said very carefully, "Do not run. Please." Her voice was the voice she uses when she tells people at an abandoned site not to step near open stairwells. We didn't run, we walked. I kept the car in the corner of my eye and tried not to blink. The wind rose and fell. In my headphones, not on my head, just slung around my neck now. I swear I heard the hum again, loud enough to vibrate the plastic. We got in. Tyler turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught. He put it in drive. The tires rolled. We moved. The wash fell behind us in the rear view like any other strip of sand. We didn't say a word until pavement. Maya cried then. Not loud, not sobbing. Just that silent kind where the face goes shiny. "We should cut the piece," she said. We can do a video about the water towers. Tyler nodded too fast. Yeah, he said. Sure. He looked in the mirror like he expected to see something running behind us, and then he laughed in a sharp, empty way. I know how this sounds, he said. We'll dump the footage if it freaks people out. Right? We didn't dump it. We're not saints. We did edit it down. We cut the monitor audio. We kept the hum in the wash because if we didn't, our commenter base would accuse us of hiding evidence. We added a text card at the end that said, respect local sites. Don't disturb anything. It felt like putting a Band-Aid on weather. We drove home that day. We didn't stop except for gas in a bathroom where the paper towel dispenser stuttered like speech. The wind followed us a long way, then fell behind. This is the part where I tell you it's over. We learned our lesson. We returned what we took. The desert is patient, and so is God. But that's not how this goes. 2 nights after we got back, I woke in my apartment to a soft sound that I thought was my upstairs neighbor's TV. I lay there for a minute trying to place the channel. It had that digital flatness you get with cheap speakers. It took longer than it should have to realize there was no upstairs neighbor, because I live on the top floor. I got up. The sound didn't get louder or softer as I moved, which is wrong. Sound should swell and fade. This stayed the same, like it was everywhere at once or somewhere your ears can't triangulate.
Not in the vent.
Not in the hallway. Not in the world. The tune was slow and patient. 2 notes. 4 beats, a rest. If it had words, they would have been the kind you sing before you learn what words are. I went to the sink for a glass of water and felt grit against my bare feet. The kitchen light carved the room into a rectangle. On the linoleum just left of where I stand when I wash dishes, sat a quartz stone the size of my thumbnail. Not the one from Tyler's pocket. Not the one from my toothbrush. A new one, cloudy white with a clear streak like a frozen tear. I didn't touch it. I got the broom. I swept it toward the dustpan and it clicked against the plastic like a tooth. I put it out on the fire escape and shut the window. The sound faded after that. Not all at once. It uncoiled itself, the way a ripple fades when the stone that made it has already sunk. I slept a little. I woke to my phone buzzing. Tyler. He had sent a video of his cat batting a pebble across his kitchen tile. He had circled the pebble and added the caption, in the voice he uses to sell jokes. Guess what rolled out of the cabinet? Then he sent another text, just the words, jaw hurts. I told him to go to urgent care. He said he'd already been. It's not dislocated, he said. It's just sore. The doc says I must grind my teeth. Then a minute later, I don't. I know I don't. Then, can you hear anything? I told him no, I lied. The hum was there if I went very still. Not loud, not dangerous, just patient. We didn't publish the video for a week. We kept telling ourselves to leave it on the drive. Then a sponsor email came through and we caved because that's the game. We uploaded. We left out the monitor. We kept the ribbon and the stones and Tyler's jaw pop. We added some aggressive bird sounds to normalize the wash track because we didn't like how quiet the hum made the world feel. The comments were what you'd expect. Half of them said we faked it with a synth. Half said they heard nothing and we were grifters. A handful, maybe 6, said something that made my teeth go cold. I played this on my TV and my baby started humming back. My kid doesn't nap, but she went to sleep during the wash scene. I looped the desert sound because it calmed my daughter down. Someone else. My son woke up crying with his mouth open like he forgot how to scream. We turned comments off. It didn't help. Our inbox filled with parents asking for the wash clip as an MP3. We didn't answer. Then one message came from the librarian, Ruth. It was one line, "You're feeding it." Under that, she pasted a newspaper scan we hadn't seen. Maybe she'd found it later. It was about an unnamed woman who walked the wash at twilight in 1953, months after the fire, singing to the wind. She had buried 3 infants in her life, the article said, and folks heard her hum that same little tune, simple and slow, like a lullaby gone wrong. She died at 62. On her headstone, someone had chiseled a circle. Tyler wanted to take the video down. Maya said that doesn't do anything. People had already ripped the clip. One big channel idled it under a rain loop. A sleep app used it as white desert noise. We sent takedowns where we could and then we stopped because it felt like trying to grab wind. Weeks later, after our views spiked and dropped, after we filmed an office park full of fake rocks to cleanse our palate, I went to try on a face I used to have. I made dinner. I called my mom. I watched the sun pull its orange trick on the city. The AC came on, the vent sighed, and then I heard the apartment below me. I can't explain how I knew it was below, but I did, fill with a soft, patient hum. Not an adult voice, not a machine. The same two notes, slow and careful, finding each other in the air. I went to my door with my hand out like that would matter, then pulled it back because what would I say if the downstairs neighbor opened up? "Hey sir, is your air conditioning singing to your baby?" You can't be the adult who brings that sentence to a stranger. I stood there with my ear to the wood and listened until my neighbor's dog pawed at their door. The dog whined in a way that made my stomach go hard, like he had an itch inside his skull he couldn't scratch. The hum, if it was possible, sounded pleased, like it had found a note it liked. I put a towel under my door. It didn't help. I went and sat on my bed and watched the pattern the streetlight throws across my ceiling. The quartz stone I'd swept onto the fire escape wasn't there in the morning. Tyler calls me less now. Not because we fought, he's just quieter. He wears a scarf sometimes, even when it's warm, and jokes about supporting his jaw. Maya still says the word we, and I'm grateful, but there's a line in her voice when we talk about desert shoots. She says she's switching our June trip to Oregon, coast not basin. She doesn't say why, and I don't push. If you're looking for advice, I don't have much. Don't take stones, obviously. Don't put a mic where a thing without a mouth can borrow your hearing. Don't stand in a circle that isn't meant for you, and if you do, make sure your head isn't the highest thing inside it. If wind sings, go the other way. If you think you've heard the sound before, ask yourself how you would have. Mostly, if you find yourself in a wash east of Fallon with the cottonwoods rattling like bones and white stones set in a circle the size of a kiddie pool, do not hum along. Do not teach it your tune. There's a kind of hunger that doesn't need teeth. It just needs a body to remember that open-mouthed shape and then another and another, until air itself knows how to cradle something that was never there. I used to believe that if a story had a beginning and an end, then you could set it down and walk away. I don't believe that anymore. Some stories fold back on themselves until they're circles, and some circles hum. It's quiet while I write this. The AC is off. The window is closed. Somewhere out on the fire escape, a bird pecks at the railing and flaps away. My jaw aches in a way my dentist calls clenching. I am not clenching. I keep touching my chin like I can hold it shut if anything tries to open it. I want to tell you that writing this made it better. It didn't. But there is something in speaking that feels like putting a stone back where it belongs. Maybe stories are circles too, and maybe you keep them closed by finishing them. So here is my end. If you go east of Fallon and you find that place and the wind sounds like a lullaby someone forgot the words to, don't record it. Don't take it home. And if you already did, if your phone hums when you plug it in and your vents hum when you fall asleep and your kid hums when the room is dark, do the only easy thing I know. Open your window and put the sound outside. Sometimes if you're lucky, the desert hums back. Sometimes it doesn't. And in the morning you'll find a single white stone by your door like a tooth, and you'll tell yourself it wasn't there yesterday. You'll tell yourself you swept carefully. You'll tell yourself there's a reason. The wind will pick up just a little, enough to move the leaves on the street trees. It will run down the hall and under your door and lift that tiny quartz like a breath, like a lullaby. Like something small that never learned to be quiet. I'm telling myself the same thing you are. It's just wind. It's just stones. It's just a story. Listen long enough, and the story listens back. I didn't go to New Orleans to chase ghosts. I went because my best friend Liv needed a second pair of hands on a wedding shoot and promised me beignets and a free couch. She does photo and video, mostly elopements and moody urban couples, as she calls them. I handle sound when she needs it. Lav mics, backup recorders, the little details that keep vows from sounding like they were said under a jet engine. It was late October. The city was still hot in a way that makes your shirt cling, and the bars along St. Claude were all blowing cold air into the street, like they were trying to cool the whole neighborhood. On our second day there, the groom suggested we grab a few atmospheric B-roll shots in a cemetery to match his bride's black lace veil. He said it like you say it when you don't want to be the person who suggests filming among graves for your wedding video, but you're going to suggest it anyway. Liv said St. Louis #1 is a mess with permits now, and I remembered reading about St. Roch Cemetery. Quiet, smaller, with those white tombs like little houses. Less touristy, the groom said, nodding as if we were all on the same wavelength of tasteful morbidity. We took a rideshare there the next morning, Sunday. The driver was a heavy-set guy named Corey with a Saints hat and a cracked dashboard Jesus that bounced when we hit potholes. When I said where we were going, he looked at me in the rear view like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. "St. Roch," he said. "Yeah," I told him. "We'll be quick." "It's peaceful," he said after a moment. "Just don't, mess with the offerings. Folks leave things for promises kept." "What kind of promises?" Liv asked. "The kind that got kept," he said. "Or the kind they hope still will. St. Roch sits quiet behind a low wall and a locked iron gate that isn't always locked. The caretaker, a woman with a sun hat and a name tag that said Baptiste, let us in after we explained what we wanted. She made us sign a notebook with a date and time and our numbers, just in case a storm rolls up and y'all need help," she said. "We've been surprised before." "It's sunny," I said, squinting. "In this town," she said, "sunny is just when the clouds are somewhere else." The place didn't feel haunted. That's the first thing I remember. It felt practical. The tombs were white boxes, some with marble plaques, some with names that had gone soft and unreadable. There were flowers in jars and plastic candles and a few rosaries looped over knobs. Someone had left a pair of ballet slippers on a step with a note tucked into one shoe. The little chapel had a room of ex-votos, the thanks for blessings that people had pinned to the walls, crutches, braces, letters, photos. There was a wedding picture from the 1980s with a big lace dress and a big grin, framed in cheap gold. And then there was the iron cage. I didn't notice it at first because it was off to the left behind a thicket of palms and crepe myrtles. You could miss it if you were moving on a straight line toward the chapel. Liv didn't miss it. She said, "What is that?" and walked like she'd been pulled on a line. It was exactly what it sounds like, a simple grave surrounded by iron bars. The bars had little curls at the top, ornamental, and they were thick, the kind of iron you don't see anymore outside of old banks. The gate was welded shut in 3 places, visible lumps like old scars. Inside the fence, in the square of packed earth, there was an inset stone with a name that had flaked away. The only word I could read was "beloved" cracked down the middle. There were chains piled at the base of the fence. Padlocks. A coiled length of rusted chain with a master lock the size of my fist. A newer bike lock with a neon cable. Someone had left handcuffs, cheap costume ones probably, looped on one of the bars. A paper tag on a padlock had bled into fuzz from rain, but I could still make out the word "please." "Jesus," Liv said softly, kneeling to get a shot through the bars. The groom and bride kept a respectful distance, holding hands. "You guys know this story?" he asked. "What story?" Liv said. "My cousin says," he began, then shrugged. "He says there was this guy buried here who killed people. He says the bars weren't to keep people out, but to keep him in." "That's not true," the bride said. "They're iron cages to keep animals from digging, right?" She looked at Ms. Baptiste, who had wandered over, arms folded. "Sometimes," Ms. Baptiste said. "Sometimes it's what folks could afford. Sometimes it's a choice the family made. You hear things. Stories aren't proof, but they keep people polite. I didn't like standing next to it. I don't consider myself superstitious. But something about the welded seams made me think of a promise someone made, and then had to enforce." Liv filmed the bars and the locks and then said, "Okay, we don't need this for a wedding video," laughing it off, and we moved on. We were there maybe 2 hours. Clouds gathered and the air thickened like we were breathing through a wet towel. When we finished, I signed us out and handed the pencil back to Ms. Baptiste. "You left something?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good," she said. "We've got enough chains for now." That night back at Liv's friend's place in Bywater, the footage from the day looked gorgeous. Liv has a way with light and shade that makes everything feel intentional. I synced audio and skimmed her clips while she took a shower. She'd included the iron cage and a few test shots, just a few seconds, moving slow. I bumped the levels to hear the ambient sound and frowned. There was the usual stuff: wind, a distant car, a crow calling. But under it, faint, something metallic. Not a squeak or a scrape. A tap, then 2 taps, then 3. It wasn't rhythmic. It sounded like someone knocking on metal with a ring finger. I muted it and told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was hearing what I expected to hear, because I had just seen an iron thing and now I was hearing an iron thing. I didn't tell Liv. You don't spook your bread and butter friend with nothing. We had the ceremony on Monday, a reception at a bar with a courtyard strung in warm bulbs. No ghosts there, just sweaty hugs. A small dog that wanted to be the dance captain. The groom's father crying when he thought no one was looking. The next day, we were supposed to meet a local guide Liv had DM'd for historical B-roll suggestions. A guy named Andre who runs small walking tours that don't feel like walking tours. He met us outside a coffee place with a baseball cap and a bottle of water and said he could show us some mural walls and a cemetery that hasn't been turned into a circus. We already visited St. Roch, Liv said. Andre's eyebrows went up. What did you think of the iron cage? There are a lot of iron fences, Liv said, careful. I mean the one that looks like a cage, he said. With the locks. We saw it, I said. He drank his water and looked toward the street. I grew up 3 blocks from there, he said. My grandmama used to say, if you make a deal, you better keep it. If you break it, make sure you bring a lock that fits. A deal with what? I asked. With who is the better question, he said, and smiled like he was kidding but didn't move on. I should have let it be. But once a thread hooks you, you can't help but pull. Between weddings and editing, my brain likes puzzles. That night I went looking. Not the whole internet, just enough to make me feel like I'd done my due diligence. There were stories, of course. Newspaper clippings about the 1915 storm that flooded the city and tore up roofs and pushed coffins out of their places. Someone wrote that a grave in St. Roch with iron bars bent like wet reeds and the coffin floated out empty. There were message boards where locals rolled their eyes at outsiders, and outsiders argued about whether iron keeps a spirit down like a lid. I found a single photo from the 1930s of that square of ground with a warped gate and what looked like a chain threaded around it like a belt. Urban legend, I told Liv, when she poked her head out from behind her screen where she was color grading. Everything in this city is an urban legend, she said. If you record a fan long enough, someone will swear they hear a voice in it. The weather app predicted storms on Wednesday. It didn't look like anything dramatic, just a line of rain. I thought about Ms. Baptiste's "You Never Know," and decided I wanted one more clean audio pass in the cemetery before we left. Partly because it would give Liv options, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself the taps on the recording were my brain doing its own tapping. I told myself I'd swing by after lunch, grab 10 minutes of ambi under the trees, leave. Liv had a coffee date with the newlyweds to talk about album printing, so I went alone. The sky had that particular New Orleans look, pale with a bruise under it. I brought my recorder and a little tripod and a furry windscreen that makes it look like you're interviewing a hamster. When I got to St. Roch, the gate was open, but the notebook was gone. Ms. Baptiste looked up from sweeping the chapel steps. Back again, she said, and didn't ask why. Just some room tone, I said, holding up the recorder like a hall pass. She eyed the sky. Room tone better be quick. I kept my steps quiet like you do when you're carrying a mic that could pick up your heartbeat if you let it. I set the tripod near a row of tombs with a wooden bench where someone had carved initials. There was a rosary looped on the back of the bench and a crumpled program from a funeral tucked into the slats. I rolled a minute of silence and listened in my headphones. The cemetery has its own voice. Cicadas, a dog far away, the creak of something drying out in the heat. Satisfied, I walked the path toward the iron cage and told myself I would not stop. I would not. I stopped. Here's what was different. The chain pile was smaller. The big master lock was gone. The neon bike lock was gone. The cheap handcuffs were still there, looped and dangling, but the rest looked thinned out as if someone had sorted through the stack and taken the strongest pieces. I told myself maybe families come and clear these things, that someone had decided it was junk. A kid cut through the path on a scooter outside the wall, and the sound made the bars seem louder in contrast when they rang. Not a clanging, a tiny, tight ping. My first thought was that a drop of rain had hit them, but the sky hadn't started yet. My mouth had gone dry in the way that feels like you've swallowed your tongue. I don't know why I did it, but I reached out and touched the iron with one finger. It was warmer than the air, then cooler, the way metal pretends to be alive. The welds were ugly and thick, but my fingertip found a nick in one where the iron had bubbled and cooled. I pressed and there was a feeling, not a shock, more like static, like touching an old TV. Back home, that would have been enough to make me laugh and walk away. There it made me take my hand back like I'd pressed it to someone's arm without asking. A drop hit my forearm, then another. The rain came on with that sudden cheating speed, Fat, warm drops, not like the rain where I'm from. I hustled the mic back toward the chapel awning, but by the time I got there, the sleeves of my shirt were dark and the recorder fur was soaked. Ms. Baptiste shook her head. "Told you," she said. "Y'all need to come back another day." "Sorry," I said. "You're fine," she said, and held the door to the chapel open. "You can wait it out or you can run for it, but don't run across the graves." I stood in the doorway and watched the cemetery flatten in the rain. Louisiana rain doesn't fall straight. It moves sideways and then sideways the other way, like it's trying to find you. The walkways started to shine. A minute later, the low places began to collect water. I wiped the recorder with my shirt and lowered the gain, just in case I could salvage anything. "It's a sickness, always recording. What happens when it floods?" I asked. "We say a psalm," she said dryly, "and we pick up what floats." "Like what?" She gave me a look. "Like flowers." "Like trash," she paused. "Like toys sometimes. The little ones leave toys." A gust took a sheet of rain and sent it straight into the chapel. Miss Baptiste pushed the door mostly closed and left it open a crack so she could watch, but the doorway view was now a slit. The air went darker. In that way you don't notice until you look at your own hands and they aren't the color they were a moment ago. In that slit, I saw 3 people move through the rain like a short parade. 2 men and a woman under a tarp, shoulders together. They took the path that led toward the iron cage, and when they got there I saw one of the men drop the tarp, shoulder first, into the fence. It made a noise I felt in my teeth. The woman reached for the chain pile, what was left of it, and started to loop it around the gate. It didn't make sense. The gate was welded, but she kept threading chain through the bars. The other man pulled something from a backpack and I realized dimly it was a battery pack and a welding wand. He didn't spark it. I didn't see a light, but he moved with the confidence of someone intent on making something stay put. "What are they doing?" I asked. Ms. Baptiste didn't answer. "Should I began, and she raised a hand, a small motion that said, "Don't." In the rain and the dimness, details go soft. But you know when a body is fighting. You know when someone is pulling on something and someone else is pushing and none of it is choreographed like a job. The man with the wand dropped it, bent, grabbed the bars. The woman never stopped feeding chain, like she had rehearsed the loop. They worked in silence until the thunder rolled low, and even then I didn't hear any shouts. When it was done, if it was done, they stepped back together under their tarp. The woman put her hand flat on the bars in a gesture that looked like a benediction or a fence check. Then they left the way they came, quick and hunched, and I lost them in the gray of it. I realized my recordings were useless. All I had was the slap and hiss of rain and my own breath moving too fast. When the downpour softened to a steady pour, Ms. Baptiste tucked her broom into a closet, took a plastic poncho from a hook, and put it on with the economy of someone who's done it 1,000 times. "If you want a ride," she said, "you can sit in my truck until it slows." "Those people," I said. "Do they work here?" "They work on keeping their promises," she said. "Like I told you." She locked the chapel door and led me around the side, picking stepping stones with her eye. Past the chapel, amid the puddles, I saw that the iron cage was different again. There were more chains now than there had been when the rain started. The woman must have pulled them from somewhere else, or maybe I hadn't seen the pile under the wash of water. The effect was of something silenced with rope. The look of it made my stomach sink. We waited in her truck with the wipers beating time. After a while, the rain got tired and the light came back the way it does when a dimmer is nudged. She drove me to the gate and I got out and thanked her. She didn't look at me like I'd done anything wrong. She looked at me like she recognized someone who'd wandered too close to the edge of a thing without realizing that edges are where people fall. Liv texted me. "You alive, me?" "Yep." "Soaked." Weather-turned Liv replied with a lightning emoji and a skull, and then, "Can you grab a po' boy on your way back?" That should have been the end of it. If this were a tidy story, I would have eaten my sandwich and archived my files and flown home the next day with a suitcase that smelled like fried shrimp. But when I scrubbed through the few minutes of rain audio that night, curiosity chewing at me, I heard something through the hiss that I didn't expect. Not the taps, not the bar song. Counting. You know how counting sounds when someone does it low through their teeth? Not for numbers, but to make each second hold still. 1, 2, 3. It sounded like that, except wrong. The numbers were uneven, like someone had learned them secondhand. What I heard was 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5. Then silence long enough to think I'd imagined it. Then 1, 2, 2, like a loop with a scratch in it. I isolated the section and sent Liv a clip with a WTF is this caption. She texted back, rain on metal. Also, don't get weird right at deadline, babe, she was right. We had a wedding to finish. We sat side by side, headphones on, like two surgeons swapping tools. We shipped the preview video the next morning to tears and emojis. We packed our bags. Our flights were at different times. Mine was later. Liv hugged me extra hard at the curb. Don't go back there, she said into my shoulder, surprising me. I'm not, I said. And she made a face like she didn't believe me, then laughed and told me to text when I boarded. I tried to go straight to the airport. I really did. But I told the driver the wrong way on purpose. I told myself I wanted a last look at the chapel ex votos, at the wall of thanks. I told myself I'd leave a few dollars in the donation box and be back in the car before anyone noticed. I told myself a lot of things and drove to St. Roch. It was bright again. That felt like a trick. The notebook was back on the table now with a new pencil. I signed in. The gate creaked the same. Tourists moved like slow schools of fish, respectful but taking pictures of everything. A man in a neon shirt knelt on the brick path to tie his shoe. A woman in scrubs placed some lilies in a jar. Normal, normal, normal. The iron cage had changed again. The chains were locked now in an obvious pattern, crisscrossed like a child's drawing of a net. New too. You can tell when metal is fresh because it looks smug. There were 3 brand new padlocks on the front, their faces shiny, their keys probably still warm from the store. Someone had written a date on one in permanent marker, 10/29, and the numbers looked recent, the ink unweathered. I wasn't going to touch anything. I swear I wasn't. But I stood there long enough that a shadow fell across the bars. I thought it was a cloud. It wasn't. It was a man on the other side of the fence, not inside the cage. That would have required an area that didn't exist, but beyond it, on the far side of the tombs, where a narrow path looped back toward the wall. He was older, hair white under a worn saint's cap, black t-shirt, work boots. He nodded at me like we were neighbors. You're back, he said. I don't think we've met, I said. He shrugged. You don't have to meet someone to know they came back. Do you work here? Sometimes, he said. Sometimes I work on the other thing. What other thing? Keeping it in, he said, not dramatically. Just like you say you're keeping raccoons out of your attic. What is it? I asked and heard how my question sounded and wanted to bite it back. He looked at the markers of the locks. It's what the locks are for. You see a padlock, it's a prayer. You see all these together, that's a promise. He started walking, and because I didn't know how else to either end the conversation or keep it honest, I walked with him. We looped toward the wall where the shade of an oak made a cool patch like a mercy. He stopped in front of a tomb that had been patched and repainted so many times the surface had the texture of cake frosting. There was a flood, he said. There's always a flood. In the big one, they say the iron bent and the coffin floated out. Empty. That's the part folks like. That's the part with bite. But the part that matters is what came after. People got sick and some of them got better. People made bargains. If you save my boy, I'll come every year. If you fix my knee, I'll bring a lock. If you get my man clean, I'll keep this gate shut. That's all fine until people leave. They move or they forget. You break a deal with the living, you get a late fee. You break a deal with the other thing, it'll come back on you with interest. You talk about it like it's a person, I said. He shrugged again, a little sorrowful this time. People made it a person when they gave it a story, he said. That's how we make mouths for the dark. You give it a name and then you gotta feed it. A kid, 7, 8, ran between us chasing a lizard and stopped dead when he saw the iron cage. He walked over to it and stuck a hand through, like kids do with anything that looks like a jail in a cartoon. His mother called his name, Marcus, and he withdrew and ran back, his palm wet with rainwater he'd brushed off the bars. I watched the water trail down the iron and darken a weld that looked suspiciously like the one I'd touched. A flicker went through me, quick and mean. I should go, I said. You should, the man said, and didn't move to stop me. If you have a lock, leave it. If you don't, leave it anyway. I don't have a lock, I said. He nodded like that was the answer he had expected and pointed at my pocket. You could leave the key, though, he said. I swear to you I did not until that moment realize there was a key in my pocket. I put my hand into my front jeans pocket and felt metal edges against my fingers. I pulled it out. It was a small key, brass with a round head and stamped letters, Master. I know what you are thinking. You picked it up without noticing. You scooped it when you gathered your recorder. You grabbed it when you wiped your shirt. You are looking for the moment the trick happened. I am too. I didn't take this, I said, not to the man but to the air. He didn't look surprised. They go missing, he said. That's part of it. Locks are promises, keys are temptations. You going to keep it or you going to keep your word? What word? I asked too loud. A couple by the chapel turned their heads. The one you made when you came back, he said gently. I walked to the iron cage feeling like I was in a rehearsal where I'd skipped pages. I didn't want to put my hand through the bars. I did, my fingers were wet. The key looked wrong against the new padlocks, which were bigger, shinier. But on the left side, tucked near the hinge, there was an old one. Not the huge master lock I'd seen first day. A smaller one, pitted and dull. I don't know why I chose that one. I slid the key in because it fit, because it turned like a sigh, because if it hadn't, I could have laughed at myself and gone home. It turned. The shackle popped with an obedient little jump. The chain it had anchored slumped an inch. Nothing dramatic. No gust of cold air, no choir of metal. I might have relocked it. I think I meant to. I tell myself I meant to. But my hand, maybe because it had been in my pocket around that key long enough to sweat, was slippery. The key fell. It fell between the bars and into the pressed dirt around the stone, in that little rectangle where nothing grows. It landed not with a clink but with a soft thud, as if the dirt had been waiting to receive it. I made a sound I don't want to describe. The kind of involuntary sound a person makes when they do the exact wrong thing in a public place. The man with the saint's cap said, "It's all right," like you say to a child who has spilled milk. "It's all right? It's all right." He said it twice, like counting wrong on purpose. He put his hand on my shoulder, not heavy, just there, and when I turned, there was no one there. I don't mean he'd stepped away. I mean in the span of me looking at my hand and back up, the shade under the oak was empty. The path behind me was empty. The two tourists had moved on. Ms. Baptiste was at the far end of the wall talking to a couple with a brochure. The world had kept moving, and whatever corner of it I had been anchored to had come loose. I didn't reach through for the key. I didn't want to put my arm into that square and blindly feel around for something that would let me relock a promise I may have unmade. I stood there until the sweat on my back dried enough to remind me I was in the sun. Then I walked calmly, I think, back to the gate, signed out like a person who had done exactly what they had intended, and called a ride to the airport. On the plane, I had a middle seat between a woman who slept with her mouth open and a man who watched something on his phone without headphones. I closed my eyes and saw the loaded chains cross and cross. I put my hands under my thighs so I wouldn't check my pockets again. The airplane noise is supposed to be white, but it holds tones. Once you hear something inside noise, your ear goes hunting. Between Denver and home, I could have sworn I heard someone softly counting. Not from the speakers, not from a seat back, but from the seam of the plane itself. 1, 2, 2, 3. I didn't tell Liv. I didn't tell anyone. I washed my clothes and returned the lavs to their case. I sent an invoice. I deleted the rain clip. I slept a little badly. On the second night back, I woke at 3:14 a.m. to a sound I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't anything loud. It was that small metallic knock, closer than it should have been. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from the radiator. Old building. Old pipes. Old ghosts. I told myself the old stories we tell ourselves. I got up, I put my hand on the radiator. It was cool and quiet, and my hand felt the same little static I'd felt on the iron weld. In the morning, there was a package on my doormat. No return address. A padded envelope, the kind you buy at a post office. Inside, a coil of chain, light duty, the kind you use for a porch planter, and a single padlock, brass, brand new, with a sticky note that said in tiny, neat handwriting, "Keep your deal." I carried the envelope to the trash and then didn't put it in. I left it on the counter like a bad option. I had a full day of editing, and a client call and a leak under the sink to fix. The normal is a bomb. But when my call ended, I opened the envelope again and the smell hit me. Not a smell really, but a temperature. The way metal smells like cold, even warm from the sun. I took the padlock out and turned it in my hands. The brand stamped on it was Master. I checked the box again for a key and found none. I looked at the place in my brain where the key had fallen in the cemetery dirt and felt my stomach fold. I didn't make it back to New Orleans. Flights are expensive. Life is sticky. But I mailed the lock to St. Roch with a note I didn't sign addressed to caretaker. I wrote, "This belongs on the iron. I'm sorry." I stopped short of writing for what? I included the chain because it felt worse to keep it than to send it where the gravity seemed to pull. At the post office, the clerk weighed the envelope and made small talk, and I smiled like a person who does not know that some corners of their life are now attached to a fence 2 states away. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. The photo was of the iron cage. The shot was from low-angled with sunlight flaring off one bar. On the front, the crisscross chains looked familiar, and there, near the hinge, I saw the new brass padlock, and my stomach turned again because the black marker had bled on it through rain and hands. And the numbers on its face were my apartment number. The text had no words. It didn't need them. I stood in my kitchen and counted out loud, 1, 2, 3, and felt like I could keep going forever if I didn't stop right then. I've tried to be good since then. I don't walk by pawn shops where keys hang in bundles. I don't pick up washers from sidewalks. I don't reach into iron fences at the park. When my neighbors complain about the radiator ticking in winter, I nod and say old pipes, and sleep with a fan to blur the sound. Sometimes, late, the fan catches the edge of something I pretend not to recognize and I turn it up. If you go to St. Roch, you might see the locks. People leave them for all sorts of reasons. Maybe you'll leave one too. Maybe your promise will be light and you'll keep it easily, and you'll never feel a little brass circle in your pocket you can't account for. Maybe you'll walk past the iron cage and never stop. If you do stop, if you do put your hand to the bars, if you feel that small familiar static, don't worry. It's just metal behaving like metal. It's just heat trading places. It's just a simple system doing what simple systems do. And if you hear counting in a storm, don't answer. Don't count back. Don't make it a conversation. Because conversations become agreements, and in New Orleans, agreements have a way of living longer than the ones who made them. If someone asks you for a key you don't remember taking, say no politely and walk away. But if you have already said yes, if you have already opened something even an inch, then do what I did. Buy a lock, send it. Don't sign your name. Don't ask for thanks. Stand at the sink and turn your faucet on until the water runs clear. I am not saying anything happened to me. I'm not saying anything is following me. I'm saying that there are places where people put iron around the dead not to keep us out, but to keep something in that was invited and then regretted. I'm saying that sometimes you keep a deal you don't remember making, because it's better than learning what happens when it comes due. Yesterday, in the lobby of my building, someone left a small, cheap plastic rosary on the windowsill. White beads, a little cross, the kind you get in a handful. I picked it up without thinking and then put it back down like it was hot. When I walked away, I counted my steps, 1, 2, 2, 3, and forced myself to stop at 4. I made tea. I sat down. I wrote this. I'm telling you so you don't go alone. I'm telling you so that if you hear tapping in the rain or numbers that don't know how to add up, you can think, that's just pipes, that's just wind, that's just old iron cooling. And if there's a key in your pocket later, if there is a shape you don't recognize lying against your thigh, you can walk to a place with a gate and leave it there. And keep walking, and never look back to see if the weld looks any different than it did before. It will, but you don't need to know how. I'm not from Erie. I moved there for 9 months to help my aunt recover from knee surgery and to get out of a job that was eating me alive. Back then I worked nights in Cleveland doing copy edits for a medical publisher. I lived in fluorescent light and microwave dinners. When my aunt asked if I could come stay, I said yes without thinking. Erie felt like a pause button. Lake wind, a handful of diners, people who made eye contact in grocery lines. I picked up a temp job at the county records office, scanning old death certificates and burial permits into a new system. It was quiet work. I listened to audiobooks and watched dust float in the light. The building used to be a high school, and the archive room still smelled like chalk and old radiator heat. On my second week, I found the duplicate. It was a burial permit from 1934. The name was Clara May Winton, age 6. Cause of death: complications of scarlet fever. There was nothing unusual about that on its own, just one more sad story in a stack of them. But the form had 2 stamps, 2 different undertaker signatures, Two grave numbers marked only a few digits apart. Someone had pencil erased one of them and written void beside it, as if they'd changed their mind at the last minute. I asked my supervisor, a woman named Debbie who always wore sunglasses on her head no matter the weather, if we ever see duplicates like that. She shrugged. They made mistakes back then. Flooded basements. Bad handwriting. It happens. What happens to the second grave number? Usually it's a cutting error. They reassign it. Would the paperwork show that? Debbie blinked at me like she was deciding if I was serious. You're paid by the page, kiddo. Don't fall down a rabbit hole. I should have let it go. Instead, I took my lunch to a table near the big windows and kept turning the pages until I found the cemetery ledger that matched the permit. I only wanted to confirm it wasn't a big deal. But in the ledger, written in neat blue ink, were two plots on the same line: Winton. Clara M., Section H, Row Cat, Grave 7, Winton. Clara M., Section H, Row 4, Grave 8. The second entry had a faint question mark beside it. I went home that day and mentioned it to my aunt at dinner. She was propped on the couch with her leg elevated, crocheting a blanket the color of pumpkin pie. Ever heard of that? I asked. Same child, two grave plots? She wrinkled her nose. You're not going to get weird on me and start visiting graveyards, are you? I'm just curious. There's a reason curiosity killed the cat, she said, but she smiled when she said it. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery named in the ledger. It was on the south side of town, tucked between a Lutheran church and a hill lined with pretty houses that looked like they'd been painted last summer. The entrance was a pair of iron gates that squealed a little as my car rolled through. I parked near a maple tree with leaves already going rusty. A grounds map was posted in a plexiglass box. Section H was up a slight incline, near a long, low building with a green metal roof. As I walked, I passed names carved deep into stone. Polish, Italian, Irish, families who'd spent a century burying each other in the same ground. There were solar lights stuck in the grass, little pinwheels turning in the breeze, ceramic angels. I don't know why, but I felt like I should walk slower and hold my breath. Row 4 wasn't hard to find. The stones were smaller there, many of them children. When I counted down to Grave 7 and Grave 8, I stopped. Two little markers sat side by side, same size, same slope. The name on both, Clara May Winton. Underneath, the same dates, 1928, 1934, the same phrase carved in a soft curve, our bright morning. I stood there a long time, feeling like I'd walked in on someone rehearsing a trick. I'm not a superstitious person. I say that the way people say I'm not a dog person, and then they end up the one at the party petting the dog in the corner for an hour. It's not that I don't believe things happen. I just don't look for them. But the sight of those two stones knocked something loose in me. It was too exact, not a reassign, not a mistake in the dirt. Two copies of grief. A man pushing a mower along a far lane turned it off and waved. He wore a neon vest and had a gray beard that fanned out on his chest like a bib. I waved back. When he came over, I pointed at the stones. Is this normal? I asked. He glanced down and made a face. Depends what you mean by normal. Same name. Same dates? Yeah, he said. His voice went a little flatter. Those tourists ask about him. We get a few, especially in summer. Tourists? Erie's got fishermen, we've got leaf peepers, and we've got ghost people, he said. Not my problem what people come for. I just keep the grass cut. What's your name? I asked. Ruggieri. He pronounced it like Ruggieri. Been here 22 years. You're not supposed to walk in the rows, he added, pointing to my feet on the narrow strip between stones. On the grass lanes only. We try to be respectful. Sorry. I stepped back onto the lane. Do you know anything about this one? These ones? He scratched his beard. Couple things. Sometimes we find candy wrappers between them after Halloween. Little shoes show up after Memorial Day. People like to leave stuff for kids, I guess. Any family still around? Don't know. He nodded toward the office by the green-roofed building. You can ask. If Barbara's there, she'll tell you the whole story, or what she thinks is the story. What does she think? That there's only one, he said. And that somebody made a clerical error. You'd be surprised how many errors we mow around. What do you think? He looked at the stones again. He didn't smile. I think there's two, he said softly. I think the ground knows it. He started his mower and made a wide circle around the row, leaving a neat stripe down the lane. As he passed the twin stones, I noticed the grass between them was patchy, thin, almost bald. Not like a path. More like the ground couldn't manage it. I went into the office, but Barbara wasn't there. A handwritten sign on the glass door said, "Back in 10." I waited 5, then 10, then gave up and left a polite note with my number. It felt wrong to pry, but on my way out I stopped at the stones again and took a picture. When I looked at it on my phone, I flinched. The shadows were odd. The sun was behind me, but there were two narrow shapes stretching toward the markers, like two kids standing hand in hand just out of frame. Back at my aunt's house, I showed her the picture. She tilted her head and blew on her tea. "It's creepy," she admitted, "but I don't see what you're seeing. Look at the shadows." "It's October," she said. "Shadows do weird things in October." That night I dreamed about laughter. Not the big belly kind, not mean. The small breathy laugh of children who think they're getting away with something. In the dream, I couldn't find where it was coming from. Every time I turned, it darted to my other side. The next day at work, Debbie dropped a sticky note on my desk. "Your cemetery lady called," she said. "Said you left a message. I called Barbara at lunch." Her voice was brisk and suspicious of small talk. When I told her what I'd found, she made that close-lipped sound people make when they think something is finite and you want to make it complicated. "It's an old clerical mismatch," she said. "Only one child is recorded in the city register. Clara May Winton. The death notice ran one day, small, no photo. My understanding is there was a mix-up with the funeral home. 2 headstones were ordered by mistake. The family didn't have money to correct it, and no one ever removed the extra one. We inherited it the way you see it." "Did the Wintons say anything about twins?" I asked. "No twins in the census," she said. "If there were, they weren't recorded or they died before census day." "It happened. What about the ground?" I said, between them. "It doesn't look right." She paused long enough that I wondered if the line had gone dead. "Soil compaction," she said finally. "We've replaced it a dozen times in 20 years. Sometimes people stand there too much. You know how it is. The internet makes a story and then the story wears out the grass." "I didn't find the story on the internet," I said. "I'm not saying you did, honey," she replied softer, "but it's out there. We get people who come at night. We call the police if they're drinking. If you want to look at anything, please come during daylight, please." "I will," I said. "Thank you." Before I hung up, she added, "Don't stick your phone between them. People do that to try to catch something. The last person who did that, we had to retrieve a stuck iPhone with salad tongs. It was a whole thing." "I won't," I promised. I meant it. But after work, I drove back anyway because promising and wanting are different kinds of muscles. It was a calm evening. The sky over the lake was a flat silver sheet, and the cemetery had that quiet you get in a library with no one in it. I parked farther away and walked up the lane, trying to look like I belonged there. I told myself I would stand for 2 minutes, say a little prayer for a girl I didn't know, and leave. As I got close, I heard it. It was faint at first, like something carried on a radio from another room. 2 little voices. A giggle and the answer giggle people make when they're copying someone. I stopped and held my breath because breath makes noise, and the sound came again. High, light. Not right on top of me, but not far. And then a sound like small shoes sliding across frost. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself. The sound stopped. I felt stupid for talking. I'm an adult. If anyone was nearby, I couldn't see them. The road below the hill was empty. There were no cars or walkers or kids around. The wind moved through the maple leaves. I took one more step and something new joined the world. A second step synchronized with mine. I froze. The air tasted like pennies. I tried it again. One tiny step. A second step laid itself on top of mine, the sound moving exactly with me like it was attached by string. "No," I said out loud. It wasn't a command. It was that word you say when a dog noses your plate. No, it didn't matter. Whatever was mirroring me fell silent. I could feel it, though. That matching that kids do when they want to be annoying. It is part game and part worming into your attention. I stood there very still because still felt like a thing I could do well. In the quiet, a car door thumped somewhere far away. A crow made a rusty hinge sound. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the sudden itch to place my phone on the thin strip of dirt between the stones, to see if something would show up on the camera. That itch felt invasive and wrong, like reading a stranger's diary. I didn't do it. Instead, I crouched, touched 2 fingers to the dirt, and said as plainly as I could, "I see you." Nothing happened. That felt important. Not a movie. Not a jump scare. Just air in October in my own heart. I left after that. I walked fast, the way people don't run from bees because they know if they run, the bee will chase them. When I turned the ignition, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl came on the radio, and I laughed because it felt like the most human sound I could make. That night, I asked my friend Maya to come with me. She and I met in college and had stayed the kind of friends who can be quiet in the same room for an hour without worrying we're boring each other. She teaches 3rd grade. She has a practical voice and strong shoulders. When I told her about the stones, she didn't say I was being dramatic. She said, "Okay, let's go find the boring explanation." We went on Saturday morning with coffees. The light did different things in the morning. It made the stones look flatter like paper cutouts. Maya walked around them and squinted at the ground. "You're right," she said. "The strip is struggling." She held her phone level and took a panoramic shot. Then she played it back for me. At the second frame, there was a flicker like heat over pavement. She went back and scrubbed the video with her thumb. Flicker, flicker. Both of us leaned in and watched, the way you watch for dolphins near the surface. "Light artifact," she said. "Probably. But let's try something." We stepped back the same distance on each side of the stones. Maya counted down and we both took a step in. The dirt gave a little under our shoes. We took another step, then another, until our toes met over the thin patch. We stopped there and I felt pressure on the tops of my shoes, like something light had leaned on them. Maya inhaled. "Did you?" "Yeah." We stood like that a few seconds and then stepped back. I realized I'd been holding the coffees away from my body like they weighed more than they did. "Okay, kids," Maya said into the space between the stones. "We're not here to bug you. Just checking." She put a little plastic dinosaur from her classroom on the lower ledge of one stone. "Do you share?" she asked. "Are you good at that?" The wind pushed hair into my mouth. Somewhere behind us, a van door slammed and someone laughed. A normal Saturday laugh with a real adult in it. It broke whatever was happening. We left the dinosaur. It felt right to leave something that wasn't fragile. 2 nights later, I woke to footsteps in the hallway at my aunt's house. Light, quick, traveling as a pair. I sat up and listened. My aunt's room was at the end of the hall. She slept with the TV on low sometimes. Blue light flickered under her door. The footsteps paused outside my room. I said, "Aunt Judy?" But I already knew it wasn't her. The steps continued to the kitchen. A cabinet door clicked open, then shut. The fridge door suctioned, then closed. I got up and followed. The house was dim. I didn't turn on the lights. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hum made a square of white on the floor. On the table were 2 water glasses side by side, and each of them had a crescent smudge near the rim as if someone had held it with small, damp hands. I stood there until the humming felt like it was inside my bones. Then I whispered, "Do you want something to be the same?" I didn't know why I used that word, same, but it was the one that fit. The next day at the records office, I dug again. I shouldn't have, but the copies and scans and barcodes felt insulting. I wanted something that wasn't grayscale and straight-edged. The person at the microfilm machine gave me a look when I asked for the 1934 Erie paper. I cranked the wheel until my thumb hurt and read the births and deaths for the whole spring. I found the Winton notice. No photo, like Barbara said. No twin, just a line about beloved daughter of Curtis and Alma, service at St. Bridget's. In the births column that month, though, there was something else. To Mr. and Mrs. Curtis Winton, twin daughters born February 2nd, no names. Just twin daughters. I sat there with the breath punched out of me. The next day, the paper ran an update. Of the Winton twins, 1 infant remains at St. Joseph's in delicate condition. No follow-up. Nothing else. The next thing with their name in it was the obituary 8 months later for Clara May. I printed the notices and took them to Barbara. She met me at the counter and read them with her lips moving, then sighed in a way that wasn't annoyed or relieved, just tired of people asking the earth to be simple. "Back then," she said, "if one of the twins didn't come home, sometimes the family didn't register the name until later. If they ever did, maybe they waited. Maybe the second child never made it a week, maybe a day. Could the other stone be for the twin who didn't make it?" I asked. "It could," she admitted. "But there's no proof. What if proof isn't the point?" I said, not to her, not even to me. To the little place in the world that had become a thin spot. What if they just want the same? Barbara frowned. "People leave toys. It makes some of our older folks mad. They say it looks like a yard sale. But you know what? Some days I think the toys help. Maya and I went back on Sunday. A hard frost had silvered the grass. The air broke like glass in my nose. The little dinosaur was on its side, and a tiny ring of thawed water encircled it like warm hands had held it for a while. We brought 2 of everything. 2 marbles, 2 ribbon bows the same color, 2 paper cranes Maya folded on the hood of my car. We set them down gently, even the marbles, like we were afraid of knocking on something we couldn't see. We stood there long enough that my toes went numb in my boots and the frost made it look like my breath had drawn shapes on the dirt. You know, Maya said, in my classroom when I have twins, I try to make sure I say both names, even if one is quiet. What if one never got a name? I asked. She tied the second ribbon bow with fingers gone red. Then I tried to give the quiet one a moment anyway. We didn't hear laughter that day. We heard the world, a car backfiring, a dog barking 4 streets over, a single dry leaf bumping along the lane like a lost coin. We were halfway down the hill when a man in a police uniform walked toward us. He put his hand up like he might be about to apologize for existing. "Afternoon," he said. "We've had some break-ins lately. Just checking." "We're leaving," I said. He looked over our shoulders at the row. "You ladies the ones leaving the little gifts?" Maya and I glanced at each other. "Sometimes," I said. He shifted his weight. "I don't know about all this stuff," he said. And then he surprised me by lowering his voice. "But my cousin worked the night shift here for a while. Said one morning he came in after a freeze and there were 2 sets of little footprints circling those stones real neat, like they were holding hands doing ring around the rosy. He asked for day shift after that. Is he okay?" I asked, because that seemed like what you ask when someone has stayed up too many night hours with a thing. The officer shrugged. He went to work at Walmart. The footprints bothered him less than the way they were the same size. Said he felt like if he followed them long enough he'd end up walking in circles, and he didn't want to find out. We nodded like people do when they won't remember the exact words, only the shape of them. For a few weeks I stopped going. Not out of fear, because I didn't want to turn it into a habit I used to occupy a space in my head that should be used for living. I helped my aunt shower and put on the knee brace that looked like it belonged on a robot. I went to work, scanned papers, made a dent in the stack. I went to a minor league hockey game with a guy who pronounced my name like he was trying it on in the mirror. I watched the lake stand up and lie down in wind. Sometimes at night I heard the light patter of steps in my hallway, and once the soft thud of 2 apples settling in the fruit bowl side by side. I never felt watched. I felt noticed. On the week before I left Erie, my aunt could climb stairs again. I was headed back to Cleveland. Maya asked if I wanted to go one more time. "For closure," she said, then laughed at herself. Or whatever. We went late afternoon, that hour when everything turns amber and you can see your own breath if you talk. The strip of ground between the stones looked the same. The ribbons had blown off. The little dinosaur had bleached a shade lighter. I brought 2 peppermint candies and set them down carefully. "We can't stay long," I said, almost to scold myself. "We've got dinner at 6. Maya looked at her watch. "We do," she said. "We're adults who make plans and keep them." We turned to go. I took 3 steps and realized my shoelace had come undone. I bent to tie it, and when I stood, the sound reached me again, that small laughter, doubled at the edges. I didn't turn around. It felt like the right way to hear it in the leaving. I reached for Maya's elbow and said, "Do you hear that?" She nodded, eyes still forward. "I do." "Is it 2?" she said. "It's 2. We walked to the car with our hearts steady and our hands cold. A gust of wind came down from the hill and pushed us a half step faster. We didn't talk until the engine was on, and even then we didn't say much. She put on the heater, and I watched the frost ghost itself away from the windshield. I thought that would be the end of it. That's the neat part of my brain, the one that likes lids and sticky notes and appointments kept. But endings aren't neat, and they're not always ends. 2 nights after I moved back to Cleveland, I woke up at 3:12. I know the time because my phone, face down on the nightstand, lit up and then went dark. In that gray space between sleeping and waking, I heard the sound of a skipping rope hitting pavement. Tap, tap, tap. Then the breathy laugh that comes after a misstep. I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured water into 2 glasses. I set them next to each other on the counter and stood there like an idiot, like a host who has run out of things to say. The house creaked. The fridge clicked. City traffic said its long, low vowels in the distance. I lifted one glass and drank, then touched a fingertip to the other. The rim was cold. I've thought about telling this story online. You're reading a version of it, I guess. Not because I want points for being calm, or because I think I can convince people who like to be convinced. Mostly I keep coming back to that thin strip of ground and what it felt like to know that something had been made uneven. In a way it didn't have to be. If there were 2 daughters and only one name made the page, that's a kind of forgetting that hardens. It's not about ghosts. It's about making space the same on both sides. I don't go to graveyards at night. I don't do EVP sessions or provoke. I still don't know what I believe, but I do know the grass between those stones will never look like the other grass. And I know laughter can sound like wind. And I know sometimes the kindest thing you can do is put down 2 of whatever you have, then walk away without turning to make sure anyone took them. If you ever go to Erie and you find Section H, Row 4, and you stand with your hands in your pockets pretending you're just there for the view, and you happen to hear something that flickers between your ears like a shadow you can't line up, don't push your phone into the dirt. Don't ask for a trick. Say hello like you're leaving a message for someone busy, then leave 2 of the same thing. Marbles, pennies, wintergreen lifesavers. Tie 2 bows. Walk back down the hill. If you hear small feet matching yours for a few steps, let them. It's their hill. You're visiting. And when you think about it later, on your couch or brushing your teeth or waking at 3:12 to a sound like a jump rope on sidewalk, try to picture the names that didn't make it onto the paper. Keep space for them. Say what Maya said without turning around. It's 2. You'll say to the empty room, and the room will feel a little less empty for it. A month after I left, a postcard came from my aunt. She'd taken up walking again and liked to circle the cemetery because the loop was even, and her knee behaved there. On the front of the card was the lighthouse in winter, its base wrapped in ice. On the back she'd written, "Saw a groundskeeper today. Beard like a bib. He asked how you were. The odd little patch still won't grow." There were 2 candy canes by those small stones. Someone's got good timing. P.S. The apples I buy now always come in pairs. I keep that postcard on my fridge. It has a coffee ring on one corner. If this were the kind of story with proof, I'd tell you I caught something on film or I dug up a second certificate that made it into the ledger. But it's not. It's the kind where you heard footsteps when you didn't think you should and you decided to be kind to whoever, or whatever, was trying to keep pace. The last time I was back in Erie, I drove by the cemetery, but I didn't go in. I parked across from the gates and watched a woman walk a beagle along the fence. The trees were gone to wire, all their leaves shed, and a low gray sky made everything look closer to the ground than it was. I sat there long enough for the windows to fog. When I wiped a circle clear with my sleeve, I thought I saw 2 small shapes cut through the mist across my glass, 2 blurry ovals side by side, about the size and height of children standing where a camera would be if the world were a picture. I didn't look twice. I started the car. I said, "Goodbye, both of you," because that was the thing that felt right to say. And then I drove back into a life that is messy and ordinary and mine. Sometimes late, the laugh shows up again, not scary, just young. It comes in pairs like shoes placed neatly by a door. When it does, I move a glass half an inch to make another just like it. I don't look to see if it's touched in the night. I don't need to. There are days when knowing is a light you turn on, and there are days when you leave the house in the dark on purpose, because you know the sidewalk by heart and you know who is walking there, just out of sight, exactly in step. I didn't grow up believing in cursed land or old bones that could still move, but the hill country has a way of making your normal rules feel small. The hills roll like sleepy shoulders under cedar and live oak, and the limestone shows in white seams where the ground splits. The air smells like dust and juniper. On a good day, it feels honest out there. On a bad night, it feels like the land is awake and listening. This happened last October, right after the first cold front near Bandera, Texas. If you're from around there, you know it as the cowboy capital, a place with painted longhorns on Main Street and a river that turns green in the right light. I was 32, working out of San Antonio as a drone surveyor for a land broker. My job was simple: fly a grid, produce a clean orthomosaic, take a few ground shots, and write up enough words to make scrub, rock, and cactus sound like real estate gold. The broker, a guy named Dillard, had a new parcel, 90 acres of overgrown ranch land off an FM road that changed numbers every time you asked a different local. It had a tumble-down windmill, a collapsed barn, lots of cedar thicket, and a rumor that the property line included a spring. Water is everything out there. You put the word live water in a listing, and buyers show up in pearl snaps and boots with checks already half written. I loaded the truck with the Mavic, a couple of batteries, a handheld GPS, 2 trail cams because Dillard wanted wildlife proof, and a cooler. My friend Maya came along for the day. She was a grad student at UTSA in anthropology, specializing in historical cemeteries. We'd been friends since high school. If you're imagining something else, don't. We were the kind of friends who called each other when we needed someone to speak plain. "I don't love Bandera County," she said as we crossed the bridge over the Medina River. "It's got that heavy feeling. It's just limestone and cedar pollen," I said, "and guys who polish their belt buckles more than their teeth." Maya smiled but didn't look away from the trees sliding by. "You know they found a bone well out here in the 50s, right? Bandera County folklore. Ranchers hit a shaft full of skeletons. Spiral stack, fingers pointing up." "I've heard campfire talk," I said. "Dillard's seller told him there's an old hand-dug well somewhere on the property. If it's that one, maybe you can write a journal article and I can put historic feature in the marketing copy." "Don't mess with it," she said, that quick. "If it's a burial, you don't put it on a brochure." "We're not touching anything," I said. "Just mapping." The gate to the parcel was somebody's afterthought, a loop of barbed wire around a cedar stump. The track beyond it was 2 ruts of pale rock and loose caliche, dipping into a draw and rising again. Grass heads brushed the undercarriage. In the back pasture, a busted windmill leaned away from the sky like it had just confessed to something and was waiting for the handcuffs. I flew the grid first. The drone hummed into that high place where it sounds like a mosquito you can't swat. The map stitched itself as I stood there with the controller. Maya walked the fence line with the GPS, pulling a line across the screen with little hop-skip movements every time she had to go around a clump of prickly pear. "What's the plan after you finish your bird's-eye art?" she asked when I brought the drone down. "We follow the draw," I said, pointing. The land shallowly cupped, a crease that collected trees too stubborn for the sun. "If there's water, it'll be here. Dillard wants a photo of anything that looks like a spring. Also, he wants a deer on a camera so he can write abundant wildlife." Maya pushed her hair under a cap. "You ever notice how real estate people say abundant for animals and charming for buildings and nothing else ever gets those words?" "You say that like you've got a better vocabulary," I said. "I just don't like lies that become habits," she said. We walked. The draw narrowed and the trees thickened. Limestone boots showed through the soil, white and gray, slick when they'd worn down from years of feet and hooves and boots and hooves again. Every once in a while we'd find signs that someone had cared once. Fence staples hammered into an oak, a rusted hinge, a length of pipe with thread at one end. We saw scat, hoof prints, the diagonal stutter of a turkey's track. It was quiet, not silent, leaves ticking in a light breeze, a far-off chainsaw, a crow that had learned the sound of a human whistle and wasn't above using it. About a mile in, the draw pinched between 2 low limestone shelves, and we smelled it, a damp mineral smell that you only get where rock keeps a secret. Maya touched my arm and pointed. On the left shelf, the stone was pocked, like it had been eaten by acid. That happens in karst country. Water disappears underground and returns somewhere else with a shrug. On the right shelf, the ground changed from calcified to soft, like there had been digging. The trailing edge of the soft spot curved in a half-moon, and the center sank in a shallow bowl. I stood at the lip, and my stomach did this stupid slow roll like I was on a pier and the water had finally reached me. The hole wasn't much, 3 feet across, maybe 5 deep, choked with cedar duff, twigs, and lighter trash like beer cans someone had tossed decades back and left for raccoons to read. But in the bottom, under the trash, the dirt looked different, packed, darker. "Don't go in there," Maya said. "Crevice traps are unforgiving." "I just want a photo," I said. I took one, and then, because I'm an idiot, I kicked the step of loose rock at the edge down into the bowl. The sound it made was wrong. Not hollow. Hollow you expect from caves, but not solid either. It was a choked, tight sound like throwing a handful of gravel downstairs. We looked at each other. Maya shifted her weight onto her back foot and stuck a stick down into the dirt. It met something hard at maybe 18 inches, slid, and then wrapped again like it had hit the edge of a plate. "There's a void," she said, "and something between us and it." A cap, I said. Maybe they covered the well, or a burial, she said. Please don't, I stepped back. I'm not fearless. I told myself it was just geology making that noise, just stone on stone. But the hair on my arms climbed up to see. Let's mark it, I said. Let's not do anything stupid. We flagged the trees around it with orange tape. I set a trail cam facing the spot. Maya took GPS points and wrote possible well in her notes. We took the long way back to the truck, skirting around the thickest juniper and swinging wide of a patch of prickly brush that made my wrists itch just to look at it. We were still on the property when a white pickup nosed through the wire and stopped beside my truck. The man who got out had a frame like a cedar post and a face the color of weather. He wore a hat that had seen actual work. When he smiled, it was quick and gone, like a flash of light on a knife. Y'all lost? He asked. He didn't say it mean, but he didn't say it like he cared much either. Surveying, I said. I held up my clipboard and tried to look like a person who paid taxes on time. Dillard Properties. I'm Ethan, this is Maya. Russell, he said. Gate was open. It wasn't, I said as politely as I could. But there wasn't a lock. He nodded at that as if it confirmed something about us. This land used to belong to the Powers family. They kept it a while, then let it keep itself. You see the well? Maya and I looked at each other again. We saw a depression, she said carefully. We didn't disturb it. Russell scratched his jaw. My daddy worked a crew that dug south of here in '54, he said. They hit a shaft full of bones. The county sent a man to look. He said it was old. Said the dead had been set in a spiral. Small ones tucked where they'd fit. All their hands turned up like they were reaching for daylight. Folks got to talking. Sheriff said disrespectful talk attracts things. They dropped rock on the hole until it quit sounding like a mouth. You're saying this is that place? I asked. I'm saying you don't put your ear to strange ground, he said. Then he glanced past us into the trees. If you camp here, bring your dogs. Dogs tell the truth about a place. We're not camping, I said. I'm just getting my photos. Good, he said. Good is simpler. He tipped his hat and drove away like he'd accomplished something. In San Antonio that night, I plugged the card into my laptop and scrubbed through the drone footage. The property looked like a dusty green rug crumpled on a white floor. At the edge of the draw, the color shifted to a darker tone like a bruise. I noted it, stitched it into the stitched map, named the file something a client would find reassuring, and uploaded it to the cloud. The trail cam I'd left on the property sends motion alerts to my phone. It buzzed around 10:13 p.m., then again at 10:25, and then again at 11:40, like whatever was moving like that part of the hour. The first clip was nothing, just leave twitch. The second was a raccoon performing a careful crime. Little hands turned out like they were about to explain something. The third clip made me sit up. The camera was pointed at the flagged trees, bright in the infrared. A thin drift of dust lifted from the depression, wavered and settled. It looked exactly like someone had blown across a mouth of a bottle. There was no animal. The brush wasn't moving. The timestamp ticked in the corner while the dust fizzed and dropped. I told myself it was a temperature inversion, that maybe the ground exhaled when the air cooled. You have to talk to yourself that way, or you'll be the kind of person who jumps at the ice maker. The next day, Dillard asked for ground flavor shots, meaning he wanted photos of me looking at nothing, so a buyer could imagine himself looking at the same nothing and liking it. Maya had classes, so I texted my friend Ray to come along. If you need the type, Ray is a mechanical contractor with a toolbox that looks like it could fix a tank and a heart that wants to fix people instead. He brought his dog, a mild old border collie named June, who once learned to open the fridge and now used the skill only for ice cubes. We got to the property in the late afternoon. Light slanted through cedar like it had been laid there by a careful hand. June hopped out, did a perimeter check, and came back with the expression dogs reserve for their most serious news. She smelled the air, looked at the draw, and made a sound I've never heard come from her. A breathy, high whine that wasn't fear and wasn't excitement either. It sounded like she had a memory stuck in her throat. Maybe she smells pig, Ray said, watching her carefully. June's ears pricked forward and then flattened. She backed up 2 steps and sat down with her shoulder pressed against Ray's knee. We walked to the flagged trees. The orange tape fluttered even though the air was still. The depression looked the same. Trash, cedar duff, dark dirt shining through where the duff thinned. June would not go within 20 feet of it. She stood with her nails dug into the soil and her eyes on the hole as if someone were standing there she didn't care for. I told myself not to be dramatic. I set the tripod, checked the level, took a few shots. Ray squinted down into the depression and said, "You hear that?" I didn't hear anything. I tilted my head. The hill country has a lot of fake sounds. Wind making vowels in the cedars, distant water pretending to be closer. Then I caught it. Faint and not continuous, just a little scratch. It could have been cedar needles shifting against each other. It could have been small rock deciding to be even smaller rock, except that it wasn't random. It moved and stopped and moved like something that could decide. We stared until we were idiots staring at dirt. Ray said he didn't like it. June had already voted no with her feet. We hung the second trail cam on the other side, aiming down at the void from 2 angles, grabbed the SD card from the first, and left when the light went silver and thin. Back in town, we watched the clips at my kitchen table with the sound up. The raccoon made another appearance. A deer ghosted through, ears swiveling, feet light, and then at 2:03 a.m. the dirt moved. I don't know how else to put it. The cedar duff shifted in a slow circle at the lip of the depression and fell in a thin curtain, like the edge of a sand timer. It took maybe 15 seconds. You can tell yourself about mice and settling and air pressure until you use up your words. You still feel it in your belly when ground creeps without a reason you like. Maya came over the next morning, watched the same clip, and put her hands on the table like she had to keep it from bucking. "If local lore is true, this is the site," she said. "If it's not true, you've still got a void in unstable limestone capped by something. Either way, nobody should be stomping around on it. This is where a county archaeologist earns their paycheck. Call the sheriff. Make it official." "Dillard will hate that," I said. "Dillard can hate it and be alive," she said. "Pick one." I called the Bandera County Sheriff's Office, expecting to argue. I didn't have to. The woman who answered took my name and the general location and said, "We'll send someone. Don't dig. Don't fall in. Don't sit on the lid to see what happens." Deputy Nunez met us at the gate later that afternoon, a man built like he carried fences on weekends. He looked, listened, took notes, and asked mostly smart questions. "There are stories about a bone well," he said, glancing toward the draw. "Every county's got its stories. My abuela told me people build spirals when they want to talk to the sky." "What do you do with a story like this?" Ray asked. "We try to keep people from dying in holes," Nunez said, not unkind. "Then we call the ones with degrees to tell us we did the right thing. You all step easy. I'll put flagging and a sign on the gate until the archaeologist can come out." We walked back through the trees. June stuck to Ray like a shadow. She wouldn't scent, wouldn't range. When the dirt turned soft underfoot, Nunez stopped us with a hand and went first. He crouched by the depression, nose wrinkling like he could smell something I couldn't. He looked for tracks, found none. "You got a flashlight?" he asked. I handed him one. He angled the beam so the light slid across the surface instead of stabbing down. It caught on something pale just beneath the duff. Not the clean curve of a bone. This was flatter, chalky limestone. He used a stick to tease it clear and then froze. The stick lifted in the air like a conductor holding the orchestra at attention. A fingertip bone, white and small, rolled against the stone and stopped. There wasn't more bone visible. Just that one, like it had gotten ahead of the others. "Okay," Nunez said, more to himself than us. He put the duff back over the bone like you might lay a blanket on a sleeping child. He straightened and his face did a thing that I respected, he decided. And then he was done deciding. "I'm calling this secured until the state gets eyes on it. Nobody touches it but a qualified archaeo person. You all don't camp out here." He looked at June, who was staring at the hole. "Listen to your dog," we agreed. We genuinely intended to obey. We did not camp. We did, because we are both dumb and stubborn in our own ways, go back out at dusk to pull the trail cams and get the hell off the land before dark. Dusk stretches in the hill country like taffy. It takes longer than it should and then ends all at once. Maya parked the truck at the gate. We walked fast, not running because running admits something. June trotted beside Ray, her ears at half-mast. We had that sensation you get in the woods when the trees seem to be arranged in a pattern that isn't for you. I tried to keep my mind on practical things. What I would write in the report, whether Dillard would fire me. What sort of grant money Maya could snag if this turned out to be something she could name. Past the old windmill, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the trail cam. even though we were still a quarter-mile away. The little thumbnail showed gray-white static like a TV with an opinion. That happens when infrared gets confused by fog or heat shimmer, except the air was cool, dry. We went faster. At the flagged trees, the orange ribbons were moving like the breath of something big in and out slow. The air was still. I don't have a better way to say that. The depression looked the same at first glance. Then I saw the spiral. The cedar needles along the lip had arranged themselves into a lazy pinwheel, fine as hair, all of them pointing in toward the center. You'll think I'm making that up. I wish I were. Do you see that? I asked. I didn't want to say it out loud and make it more solid, but I needed someone to agree that my eyes weren't picking patterns they wanted. Maya didn't speak. She had her phone out, filming, her hand almost steady. Ray said too loud, "Get the cards and let's go." June planted her feet and growled, a sound so deep it sounded like it came from the ground through her chest rather than out of her. I stepped to the first camera. The little red light blinked, telling me it had a gift. I popped the latch, pulled the SD card, slid it into the case, and pocketed it. The second camera was 10 feet to the right. 10 feet is nothing in a kitchen. 10 feet is a mile in a place that's breathing for you. At the second camera, my hands weren't as clever as I wanted them to be. The card stuck. I whispered a word I'd learned from Ray. He stepped forward to help and then stopped as if he'd hit glass. His eyes cut to the hole. The dirt inside was no longer flat. Something underneath was pushing up in a slow, reluctant swell, as if the ground were trying to swallow a fist and failing. It rose less than half an inch and fell. A trick of light, I told myself. The surface of the earth breathes. It expands as it warms, contracts as it cools. The mind puts intent on accidents and calls it story. Then we heard it, a faint, dry scrape from under the duff. Then another, then a pause. It sounded like stone against stone. I could have accepted that. The next sound I cannot accept, but I also cannot return. It was the softest tap, like someone beneath the limestone had lifted a nail and tapped once. Not scratching, not clawing. Tapping like a knock. "Okay," Maya said, and her voice broke on the okay. "We're done, we were done, we turned." The flagged ribbons lifted and fell in a wind that wasn't there. June barked once, a high warning, and then did something I have never seen a dog do. She began to walk backward, eyes on the hole, feet placing themselves without tangling, as careful as an old person stepping from a curb in the dark. We made it 50 yards before Ray grabbed my sleeve hard enough to hurt. "Shh," he said. We listened. It was quiet except for our breath and the dry whisper of cedar. Then we heard the new sound behind us, a trickling. Not water, small rock, slow pouring. Like sand leaving an hourglass as someone pinched the neck and then let go. We didn't run. I won't lie, I wanted to sprint until my legs forgot my name. But we moved like people who knew that the ground holds grudges. June's tail brushed my knee. Maya kept filming until the footage jigged and I heard her swallow, and she slipped her phone into her pocket and slipped her hand into mine for 3 heartbeats, and then let go. That detail sticks with me because it's the only time in our friendship she's ever done that. At the truck, the light was doing that last trick of daylight where everything looks like it's inside a glass of iced tea. We got in. Ray started the engine. It didn't catch. He tried again. The engine whined and hiccuped and died. "No," he said, "not to the truck, to the air." He tried a third time. It caught, coughed, and then ran. We rolled forward, bumped the cattle guard, and pulled the loop of wire across the gate. Maya tied it in a knot that sailors used 100 years ago. Ray put his forehead against the steering wheel for a second and laughed without humor. "I'm not superstitious," he said, "but I am very tired of this." That night, the trail cam sent one last clip at 11:58 p.m. I watched it alone at my kitchen table with the overhead light off. In the infrared, the flags hung like white tongues. The dirt didn't move. There was only a sound, thin, almost out of the camera's mic range. A hush, 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 like someone long out of practice trying to whisper a prayer, breath catching on stone. In the morning, I called Deputy Nunez and told him we weren't going back. He said the county archaeologist would be out within the week. He thanked us for not doing anything dumb. He said a lot of folks do dumb as a first language. He didn't say whether he believed in the spiral or in the old story. Belief didn't matter. A boundary did. 2 days later, Dillard called to complain about the sign on the gate. I told him he could take it up with the county. He said in that oily tone that gets him check signed that buyers don't like spooks. I told him he could list the sky as a feature and leave the ground to the people who knew it. Here's the part I don't tell in public because I don't want the wrong kind of attention. The night after the archaeologist's first visit, he wasn't allowed to dig yet, just evaluate. The trail cam sent a final alert at 3:17 a.m. The clip is 15 seconds. The flagged trees stand still. The hollows are dark. The cedar needles at the lip are arranged in that same soft spiral. At second 5, the spiral twitches, tightening the tiniest degree, like a muscle that can almost remember the old movement. Then something skinny and pale pushes a fraction of an inch up through the duff, hesitates and drops back. You'll say root. You'll say insect. I've said both. You can hear through the rush of a cheap microphone a single touch, tap, like the smallest knuckle against stone. Then the clip ends because the camera's card is full. I deleted the cloud account attached to that camera. I took the batteries out and slid the camera into a plastic tote in my closet. I don't want to be the guy who feeds a story with attention. I also don't want to be the guy who forgets what he saw and then finds out forgetting is a type of invitation. Maya wrote a careful email to the county with citations and phrases like probable mortuary context and culturally sensitive. She doesn't talk about the spiral. Academics don't say spiral unless there's a diagram. Ray replaced the starter in his truck, even though it was probably fine. June sleeps at the foot of his bed now, which he says is sweet, except that sometimes she wakes up and sits and stares toward the window, where the wind can't touch the curtains. There's talk in town that the ranch will be sold to a man who wants to plant olives there, which is a very Californian idea to force on Bandera County. Maybe he'll terrace the slope and the slope will let him. Maybe he'll put a gazebo where the windmill used to be. The land doesn't care about our gazebos. I still work the hill country. When I crest certain hills, I can see 100 miles of sky and the Medina sliding like a green ribbon, and I forget to be careful. Then I pass a stand of cedar that doesn't move in the breeze, and I remember, in the spring when the bluebonnets come up, people will take photos in fields that used to be other things. They'll kneel and smile and make the same shape with their hands over their eyes to cut the glare. That's fine. That's good. We need easy pictures. If you camp out there, if you ignore the sign and slip through the wire because you think the night belongs to anybody with a flashlight, bring a dog. Tie a red bandana around their neck so you can see them in the dark. When the wind shifts and the cedars stop gossiping and all you can hear is your own blood, listen. If you hear the dry whisper of dust moving where it shouldn't, if you feel the ground hold its breath under your boots, if you hear a tiny, polite sound like someone tapping to be let out, be rude. Leave. Let the dead keep their spiral and their fingers turned toward the light. Some arrangements are not for us to fix. I get it if you don't believe any of this. It reads like a dare. I'm not daring you. I'm asking you to prefer boredom over proof. The hill country was old before we were clever. The limestone has holes that learned to keep a secret. In 1954, a crew of men found one of those secrets and covered it with stone because that was the language they had. Last October, I put a camera on it because that's the language I had. We all speak to the ground in the words we know. Sometimes the ground speaks back. I moved apartments in January. Different neighborhood, more light. The first night in the new place, I woke at 3:17 a.m. for no reason, I'll admit. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind was making that soft howl in some tree I don't know the name of yet. I lay there and stared at the ceiling. My brain did what brains do. It played back old footage. It made the cedar needles turn in a careful circle. It made the tiny tap. I reached down the bed with my foot and felt the floor, as if reminding myself I was not above a void. That's silly. I know that's silly. But I left my foot there until my calf ached because I needed to feel solid. I slept eventually. When I woke up, there was a fine dust on the windowsill. A straight little line of it like someone had drawn with a finger and missed. It's probably drywall. Old house's shed. That's all. I tell you this because we all want to know where to step and where not to. We want the map to show the mouth. We want the sign to say in a voice we believe, don't put your ear to strange ground. So here's a sign from me to you in plain speech. Don't go looking for the bone well. Don't camp near Bandera with the idea in your head that you're owed a story. If you hear the scrape, if you hear the dust move like a whisper, if you hear that little tap as if the ground is politely asking whether you remember the old secret, say that you don't. Say you're sorry. Leave your water if you have it on the rocks for the living things that aren't trying to go anywhere. Walk back to your truck before the dusk stretches too thin to hold you. And if by some necessity you can't explain, You find yourself standing at the lip of a shallow bowl where the cedar duff has arranged itself in a soft spiral. You can feel in your teeth as much as see, and you feel your hands want to lift for no good reason. Clench them. Put your fingers in your pockets. Look at your dog. Let her take one step backward, then another. Let the land keep its memory. Let the spiral complete itself without you. Some nights when the wind changes, if you're quiet and the hill country is paying attention, you can hear bone against stone like a dry prayer. It isn't for you. It was never for you. It's just the old arrangement settling a little, or getting ready, or remembering how to point toward the light. I'm writing this because I still wake up thinking I hear water slapping at stone. I'm not a writer. I'm a 32-year-old guy who went back to my hometown in coastal Maine for the kind of reason people on Facebook summarize with a broken heart emoji. My mom got sick. I took a leave from my warehouse job in Massachusetts, moved into her little ranch house outside Calhoun Bay, and picked up whatever shifts I could find to keep the lights on. Snow plowing in winter, a little painting in the spring, and groundskeeping at St. Bartholomew Cemetery year-round. If you've ever driven up Route 7 toward the marsh, you've seen St. Bart's. It's small, old. The newer plots are up near the road, tidy and level. The older section dips toward the cattails, where the ground squelches even in August and cemetery flags whip without wind, because there's always a draft from the water. There's one mausoleum down there, made from blocks of dark granite that stays cold even in June. The door is iron, with a barred window in its top half and a cross carved through the middle so you can see shadows move inside when you sweep a flashlight across the glass. That's the Wentworth Mausoleum. The moving tomb, people call it, like it's a roadside attraction. It isn't, it's a headache. And if you've heard the story about the last caretaker who vanished there if you've heard that they found his flashlight wedged in the door, you've probably assumed. The rest is small-town folklore. I did too until last spring. The first thing you should know is the movement is real. It's not like it gets up and walks. It's a slow stone-on-mud creep. Frost heaves, the older guys at the hardware store say. Subsidence. Every spring, after the thaw and the heavy rains, someone takes a tape measure from the northeast corner of the mausoleum to a rebar stake set 10 feet away. They log the distance. There's a whole binder of handwritten entries dating back to the 1930s, when the Wentworth family added the mausoleum, rather than bury two sons who were lost at sea. They chose to be above water, the newspaper said, which is a hell of a phrase in a town where the marsh is always licking at your property line. Write it down. And don't embellish, said Marjorie, the head groundskeeper on my first day. She's in her late 50s, quiet with hands like roots. She handed me a pencil stub and a clipboard. We keep records because memories lie. No elaboration, I said. Got it. We walked the lower cemetery together, her boots finding the dry hummocks automatically, my steps going wrong every time. The marsh had that glassy look it gets when the water is shallow and still. A heron stood out there hunting as if it were carved from pewter. When we reached the mausoleum, I felt the temperature drop. It wasn't just shade. The granite seemed to radiate cold, like a block pulled from a meat locker. The door had a newish padlock, and the iron cross in the window was crusted with salt, as if someone had misted it with seawater. Marjorie took off her glove and pressed her palm to the stone like she was checking a forehead. Every spring, she said. A few inches. Then in August, it's right back here again. Back? I asked. It moves toward the marsh and then backs up the hill. Not exactly uphill. She squinted at the cattails. It chooses, I laughed. Frost heaves choose? She looked at me the way people do when they want to be kind but don't want to waste it. Just log it, she said. And never prop the door open. Why would I open the door at all? We have to check for water inside, she said. Condensation seeps silt, we keep it dry. She said it like it was a pact we measured. 9 feet, 3.5 inches from corner to stake. Last year's spring entry said 9 feet, 8 inches. A neat 5-inch slide toward the marsh. The page from the previous August, 9 feet, 4 inches, was in another hand with a notation I didn't understand. Fog inside. No weather to explain. Sea fog pouring out at dawn, said a man's voice behind us, and I turned to see Deputy Haynes, who I'd gone to high school with. He was one of those kids who hung out in the wood shop and now wore a uniform like he was born to it. He pointed at the door. Always in the morning. Looks like a kettle boiling if you catch it just right. I walked a dog around here last March. It pulled me toward this door, whining. You're supposed to be patrolling, not haunting the cemetery, Marjorie said. But she gave him a small smile, the kind you reserve for people who bring coffee without asking. Patrolling, he said. I'll patrol later. To me, you hear about the flashlight? I did. I tried to sound bored. Urban legend. Nah, he said. It's real. My uncle has the photo. Guy's name was Pike. Evan Pike. Went to check the tomb after a storm. Never came back. They found his flashlight jammed under the door, still on. Like he was using it to prop it open and the door shut on him. Beam pointed down the steps into the dark. Raccoons, I said. Then where's Pike? Haynes asked. I didn't have an answer. I wrote the measurement in the log and made a note. No water, no smell. Which was true that day. The iron was cool under my hand when I checked the lock, and I walked away telling myself that if the tomb chose anything, it chose whatever any building chooses, the path of least resistance as the ground swells and settles. I told myself to stop anthropomorphizing stone, but records aren't just numbers, they start to work on you. Maybe you've had this happen with an old house. A floorboard creaks in the same place every night at the same time, and your mind suggests a routine, someone pacing. The brain wants a story, so it writes one. The mausoleum has a way of doing that, only it helps you along. The binder is full of pencil notes from caretakers long dead, and there's a stretch in the late 1970s where the handwriting gets jagged. Salt crystals on hinge, no wind. Condensation on interior wall, outside dry. Smell like low tide. Then, right before the entry about Evan Pike's disappearance, I hear it. No elaboration. The next morning I went early just to see. It was barely light. The marsh was flat and dull like smoked glass. The tomb was sweating. Not the air, not the ground, just the tomb. The iron bars were beaded with tiny droplets and the granite blocks looked darker, as if water had risen inside the stone itself. Condensation, I wrote, but the pencil slipped because my fingers were slick. You know that smell when you're near the ocean at dead low tide? That iodine metal stink? It seemed to come from the keyhole. I thought about my mom who'd been sleeping badly. I thought about bills and grocery runs and jug milk and getting the snowblower tuned before next winter. I thought about everything except the iron door, which the same part of my brain that keeps you from touching a hot stove did not want me to open. Then I opened it because that was the job. The lock was new, but the latch had an old muscle memory. The door swung in and stopped. I had to put my shoulder against it. Something resisted and then gave with a noise like wet sand sucking a boot. The smell hit me harder. I turned on my flashlight. The beam lit up gray steps, slick with a sheen like oil, leading down into the tomb. The walls were rough granite blocks. The floor at the bottom, maybe 6 steps down, looked level, but the light fizzed against humidity. There was a long metal grate in the center of the floor, like the kind you see on walk-in coolers, only pitted and scaled. I saw a fine thread of moisture running toward it from the corner, the way water migrates to a drain. I listened. I heard nothing but my breath, and underneath it, a hush like distant traffic, which is ridiculous because there's no highway near the marsh. Still, that's what it sounded like, a faraway wash. I took a step down, then another. My boot soles squeaked. I told myself I'd just check the corners and go. Something moved across the grate. Not with purpose, a ripple, a shift. I'm not doing this, I said out loud to nobody and backed up a step, then another, then pulled the door to and locked it with my hands shaking. When I wrote in the logbook later, I stuck to the facts. Interior damp. Floor drainage functioning. Smell present. I did not write that the damp felt like breath. There's a difference I learned between fear and dread. Fear spikes. Dread is a sustained note. It's the thing you carry with you while you make coffee and watch the weather. While I repainted the fence behind my mom's house, dread was there. While I watched a Red Sox game with the sound down so my mother could sleep, dread sat where my feet should go and kept them on the coffee table. It said, "You left the door locked, right? And then you'll have to go back." I tried to pawn the mausoleum checks off on someone else, but Marjorie just shook her head. "We don't pass the buck down there," she said. "It gets to know you." "How can a stone building get to know me?" I asked. "It pays attention," she said. I laughed. "To what, heart rates?" "To kinds of people." She wiped her hands on her jeans. "Some people maintain it. Some people pry. It learns the difference." "Do you believe the stories about Evan Pike?" I asked. "I believe he disappears from the log," she said. And I believe we found his flashlight. She told me something then that I don't think is in the folklore. The Wentworths who built the mausoleum weren't old money sea captains or anything like that. The father worked at the tannery. The sons were volunteer Coast Guard. One winter they went out and didn't come back. They didn't want their boys in the ground, the paper said, because the ground takes. They wanted them above water. They chose stone. But the marsh is patient, Marjorie said, and the water remembers. The next storm rolled in a week later, one of those spring lows that comes off the Atlantic and parks over the coast, dumping rain in gray veils. The wind had a chewing quality. It ate at your ears. Haynes came by the cemetery around dusk and helped me check the lower section for branches, and then we stood under the cedar at the edge of the old plots and watched the cattails thrash. "Don't be stupid," he said finally, which is exactly what you say to a friend when you know they're going to be stupid. "I have to check for seep," I said. "You checked it yesterday." "Storm surge," I said. "Pressure changes." He nodded once, like he was agreeing with me to make me feel better about what I was already going to do. Then he surprised me by saying, "I'll give you 10 minutes. If you're not out by then, I'm calling it in and I'm not going in after you." "I don't want you to go in after me," I said. "Good," he said, "because I won't." He pulled his cruiser up as close to the old section as he could without bogging down and pointed it so the headlights shone across the mausoleum door. Rain smeared the beams into white sheets. I took the logbook under my jacket. The padlock was a little stiff from salt, but it opened. The iron door stuck again, and again I felt that give, like suction. When I pushed the door wider, the smell that came up hit me so hard I felt my throat try to close. Iodine and old pennies. My flashlight beam swam in the humidity. I put my foot on the first step and it slid forward a half-inch and caught, as if the stone itself had changed shape under a layer of slime. "You have 9 minutes," Haynes said behind me. "I'm just checking for standing water," I said, but my voice didn't sound like my voice. It sounded like a recording of me played in a tiled room. I took the second step, then the third. The beam found the grate and glittered off it. I could see water now, a filming layer that shivered although the air was still. The rain on the door made everything rattle lightly. I thought about how stupid I was being. I thought about how this would sound in the paper. "Local man slips, drowns in 4 inches of water." I was 3 steps from the bottom when something slapped softly against the grate. Not a wave. Not exactly. More like the sound you get when you tip a bucket and the water finds the lip. I froze. Then I did something dumb, which is also something you do when you're scared. I pointed my light away from the sound instead of at it, as if I didn't want to catch it doing whatever it was doing. The beam went across the far wall. There was writing on the granite. Not graffiti. Not a name. It was a chalk line, a neat one, drawn about waist height. An inch above it, on the stone itself, the black crust of salt had formed a matching band like a tide mark. Another slap against the grate. I swung the light down. The water had risen. Not a lot. Not in a wave. Existing water just swollen like a held breath. The film carried small debris, silt, a strand of marsh grass, a flake of rust. The grate burped. That's the closest word, a bubble. I heard the faraway wash again, harder now. Not traffic, not wind. The noise you get if you put your ear to a storm drain while the street floods and know the whole thing leads to the ocean. I took a step up. The air near my ankles was cold enough to sting, the way ocean water stings in spring. From outside came a horn. Haynes, one short blip. 8 minutes. I turned to go and my light hit the interior of the door. In the fogged beam I saw scratch marks. I didn't want to. My eyes just did that thing eyes do where they make sense out of contrast. The iron on the inside of the door had long strips of paint missing, and beneath that, scoring. Clawing. That's what your mind says, clawing. But they were too straight, too parallel, like someone had dragged a heavy piece of metal across the surface many times from top to bottom. A flashlight body? A mag light, maybe, scraping as the door closed. On impulse. Pure, bad impulse, I squatted and shoved my own flashlight under the door and kicked it, jamming the barrel beneath the iron like a doorstop. It wedged with a sound that electrified every nerve I have. The beam cut sideways across the threshold and lit up the steps in the wet. And something in my head unknotted, the way you relax when you hold a stranger's baby and it doesn't cry. The wind blew hard. The door's weight shifted. The flashlight groaned but held. 7 minutes. Haynes said, too close like he was behind me, but he wasn't. I could see his cruiser out there in the rain, headlights streaking. The voice had come from the stairwell below. No, that's wrong. It didn't come from anywhere. The stairwell just breathed those words in and out the way a pipe organ breathes a note. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was watching the water swell again. The line on the wall, waist height, made sense now. It wasn't chalk. It was paint from someone else's flashlight, worn thin by fingers. Or maybe it was chalk. Maybe people have been writing warnings in here since the 1930s and the walls have taken them in and made them part of themselves. The grate burped. Water pushed around the edges and spread. It touched my boot and my whole foot went numb up to the ankle. I snatched my leg back and banged my knee on the step so hard I saw sparks. The numb went away and cold came in its place, a cold that felt like hands. Not grabbing, measuring, that was enough. I turned and took the steps up 2 at a time. The door frame was a notch darker than the rest of the world. The wedge of my flashlight threw light into the rain. As I reached it, the door moved. Not from wind. From within. The iron pressed down. The flashlight flexed in a way that should not be possible for metal. The beam skittered across my hands. Don't, I said to whom I don't know. The door surged and snapped the flashlight straight. Then the beam went out and night rushed in. The door slammed with such force that the sound was less like something closing and more like something landing. I hit it with my shoulder, expecting it to give with the same wet sand sound it always did. It didn't. The seal was absolute. I swore and shoved and yelled for Haynes without knowing if I was saying his name or just sound. Then his hands were on my arms, pulling me back, and he was saying, "Move, move, move." And the two of us stumbled across the mud until we stood in the cruiser headlights like two idiots in a play. "You were at 9 minutes, he said. "I'm not counts on a clipboard about much, but I'm counts on a clipboard about that." "My light," I said. He looked at the door. "The light that was stupidly keeping the door open," he said, not unkind. He wiped rain out of his eyes. "I'm not getting it. You want to go back? Go back in August." We left the logbook on the hood and stood there with rain drumming the paper until Marjorie's truck headlights painted the graves behind us. She took one look at us, looked at the tomb, and said, "Get in the truck." She didn't ask for the measurement. Her kitchen smelled like coffee and weed killer. She set a dish towel on the table and dropped a key onto it. It was old iron, the kind you'd see on a castle key ring in a movie. "The padlock's for show," she said. "The real locks are in the stone. If it wants closed, nothing human makes it open." "What is it?" I asked. "The structure," she said. "The way water makes things heavier and lighter and other." And she waved her hand around to mean physics we didn't learn in school. And maybe more. Maybe the boys the father wouldn't give back. Haynes put his hands around his coffee cup like it would keep him from saying something worse. "You said you hear it," he told Marjorie. "What does it say?" "I don't hear words," she said. "But I know what a place wants. Houses want things. Barns, sheds. They want dry or they want heat or they want people to use them. That one wants down. Into the marsh?" I said. "Into the water," she said, and she looked at me with pity. "It didn't pick you because you're brave. It picked you because you're lonely enough to listen." I wanted to argue, but I live alone and talk to my mother through her bedroom door while she pretends to sleep so I won't hear her cough. I keep the TV on for company and walk around the house in circles when it's windy because I don't like hearing the siding flex without witnesses. She wasn't wrong. I didn't go back the next day, or the next. The storm moved on. The marsh laid itself down again like a cat on a rug. When we measured a week later, the mausoleum had advanced another inch toward the water, which made no sense. It moves in spring during the thaw, yes, but not in a steady march during dry days. Still, the tape went tight and the number in my pencil stub matched what my eye said. Closer. "Write it down," Marjorie said. "Don't embellish." I didn't embellish. But I started dreaming about breath on the backs of my knees. A month passed. My mother had a good week and asked for pancakes. We ate them looking out at the pine trees while a squirrel made reckless leaps from one branch to another, like he'd invented air. I stopped thinking about the mausoleum, except when my phone buzzed with weather alerts that included the word coastal. I avoided Haynes, because I didn't want to look like a guy who needed to be pulled out of a basement by a cop he grew up with. I avoided Marjorie because I didn't want to ask her what it wanted again and hear her say down. Then the call started. That makes it sound haunted. They weren't. It was the plumber about the water heater. It was the pharmacy about a refill. It was my aunt wanting to know if we needed lasagna. I'm only telling you because I started noticing how often people said the word drain. "Can you check the drain pan?" Did you hear the floor drain in the basement gurgle? The sink drain is slow. Dump a box of salt down there and some hot water, see if it clears. I poured salt and listened to the pipes moan and thought about the grate in the mausoleum floor. When August finally came around, the marsh gave off heat like a living thing. You could stand under the cedar and feel air rising from the cattails as if the whole place were a lung. "This is when it comes back," Haynes said, squinting. He had his hands on his hips like he thought the mausoleum might be persuaded by posture. We measured. 9 feet 4 inches, the August number. It had returned from the marsh, or from the idea of the marsh, to almost where it had been in spring. The padlock was dusty. The iron cross window was crusted white with salt but dry. When I touched the stone, it was warm. "Don't go in," Haynes said. He didn't even try to hide it with a joke. "You gave it your flashlight. Keep your blood." "I just want to grab the light," I said. "And why?" he said. "Would you need the exact same flashlight you can buy at the hardware store?" "It's not about the light," I said before I could stop myself, which is how you betray that it is absolutely about the light, and it has been about the light the whole time. Marjorie came up over the hill. She had the old key in her hand. She looked down at my boots, then at the door. "I'll unlock it. You will not prop it with anything. If I say out, you go." "Okay," I said. The padlock came off easily. The old key slid in with a small, satisfied sound. When the inner mechanism turned, I felt it in my teeth. The door, when it opened, did not suction. It just swung light like any door. The smell wasn't there. The air in the stairwell felt like any summer basement, close and a little dusty. When I clicked my new flashlight on, the beam showed the steps in the grate and the corner where the floor always seemed to gather a dark sheen. The chalk line or paint line on the far wall was still there, faint. Above it, a second line, fainter still, tide marks. My old flashlight rested against the third step from the bottom. I knew it by the piece of duct tape I'd wrapped around the barrel, the curl lifting at one corner. I took 2 steps down and reached for it and felt a tear open along the inside of my knee, where the scar from Little League still pulls when I try to sit cross-legged. That's how ordinary the moment was. Me and my dumb body doing what dumb bodies do, trying to bend. Marjorie put her hand hard on my shoulder. "Out," she said. "Let me just out," she said again, and her voice had the authority of someone who's seen bad outcomes and can recognize the preface to more of them. I picked up the light. It was lighter than it should have been, like a toy. I turned it over. The bulb was gone. The battery compartment was empty. Just the shell. "It didn't want the light," she said. "It wanted the wedge." We came up and she shut the door and relocked it with both locks, the pretend one and the real one. The air outside felt thin and good. Apple peel cool, even though it was humid enough to blur the pavement. "Did you see that other line?" I asked. "On the wall?" She nodded. "It leaves records too." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "we're not the only ones who measure. I would like to tell you that's where the story ends. That I keep my mother comfortable and start a job at the hardware store in town, and wave at the marsh as I drive past it, and never smell a tide pool in a place where there shouldn't be one. But I promise to write this down without embellishment. And the truth is, the story doesn't end. 2 weeks after we went in, a contractor hired by the town showed up with a skid steer and a crew of guys with chain and a come-along. The select board had decided to move the mausoleum uphill a few feet permanently, pour a new foundation, and run perforated pipe below it so the water could escape. When I heard about it, I felt the kind of relief you aren't proud of. Let the professionals do it. My part can be coffee runs and standing back with my hands in my pockets saying, "Looks good." I wish that's what happened. They wrapped chain around the base stones like belts. They drove stakes into the ground and attached the come-along and cranked, and the chains went tight and the blocks didn't move. The men looked at one another and shrugged in a way you only get from men who have never failed to move something with chain before. They cranked harder. A flock of red-winged blackbirds lifted out of the cattails like thrown soot and wheeled in the heat. I had that feeling you get in your mouth when you bite on aluminum foil. Sparks and sourness and the taste of a battery. "Stop," I said, too quietly for anyone to hear over the ratchet. The chain leaped. It didn't break, it slid. The whole line, steel, metal, hooks, jerked slack with a snap that made me wince. The hooks had dragged along the base of the stone and polished a groove in it, bright as a fishback. Across the iron door, a sheen flashed and was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked nobody. "Did you see it sweat?" They tried again with a different angle. They tried to jack. They tried prayer, probably. At one point, Haynes put his hand on the hood of his cruiser like he was blessing it. Nothing. Around 4 o'clock, the crew chief said something to the select board guy that was probably a bid for more time and money. And then someone's phone rang and everyone got very quiet because the call was from the state. There had been a complaint. You can't disturb a mausoleum without this permit and that permit. You can't move it because the stones are historical. You can't do anything because someone who is never here wants to say no. They packed up. The chains left black kisses on the granite that the afternoon sun dried into nothing. That night I woke up to rain. Real rain. Hard enough that the gutters didn't carry it, hard enough that the roof sounded like you were inside a drum. I got up to check the back door and saw through the kitchen window that the street was already a river. The maple out front stood in a sheet of water that reflected every lightning flash, so the sky looked like it had flowed down around it. The drains burbled. The sink made a glug-glug like a kid trying to drink faster than he could swallow. I went to my mother's room. She was awake, staring at the door like she knew I'd be there. "It sounds like the ocean," she said. "It's just heavy rain," I said. "My feet are cold," she said. "Will you get the old blanket?" The old blanket is a worn-out green thing that smells faintly of cedar chest, and something I can only describe as waiting rooms. I tucked it around her ankles. Her legs felt like rolled socks inside the sheet. "Thank you," she said and closed her eyes. She opened them again. "Make sure the basement pump is plugged in," she said. "Your father always forgot." I went downstairs with a flashlight, the new one. I keep the empty one in a drawer like a token. The basement smelled like a pier. The sump pump was running like a heartbeat, like chewing. Water ran through the clear hose and out into the yard. I watched it for a while and then, because I am not smart, I put my ear to the cinderblock wall in the corner of the basement where the stones sweat in summer. The wall was cool. The sound on the other side wasn't water. It was the hush you get when someone tells you to be quiet in a movie theater, and everyone actually does it. The sound of held breath. The next morning I drove by St. Bart's on my way to the pharmacy. The clouds had shredded to bands and the marsh had that weird post-storm brightness like it was lit from underneath. The mausoleum was closer to the cattails. Not feet, inches, but not the number I'd written back in the spring either. New ground. The earth had given up a little, maybe. The stakes were still there, leaning. The tape measure hung from a nail in the cedar with the hook bent like an old finger. I didn't stop the car. I didn't stop the car because if I stopped the car, I'd get out. And if I got out, I'd go down the steps, and if I went down the steps, I don't know what I'd bring back. Instead, I went to the pharmacy. I stood in line behind a woman buying gummy vitamins and a guy in a sweatshirt that said, "Eat lobster," and I smelled low tide on their clothes. When I got home, there was an envelope on the porch with no return address. Inside was a photo, glossy, 4x6, the old kind people print when they still believe in paper. It showed the mausoleum at dawn, mist drawing itself out of the iron cross window like string pulled from a wound. On the back, someone had written in a neat hand like the old logbook, "Measure without lies." No signature. I went back that evening with the binder under my arm. The ground had firmed up. A rabbit watched me from under the cedar like I might have food or bad news. At the mausoleum, I stood with the stake and the tape. The number was 9 feet 2 inches. If I wrote that down, it would be the furthest it had ever been toward the marsh in August. If I wrote down 9-4 again, the way August numbers had been for years, then my pencil would keep the world the same. I wrote 9-2. My hand shook. The 2 looked like a 7. It will confuse someone someday. I closed the binder and stood there and counted breaths until the ground stopped tilting under my feet. As I went to put the logbook back inside its plastic bag, I realized it was wet. Not rain, the plastic was dry. The paper inside was damp, as if someone had exhaled into the bag and sealed it. That night somebody or something left my old flashlight on my porch. The empty one. The tape on the barrel had been peeled off and stuck back on crooked. When I opened the back, a single thing rattled inside. It wasn't a battery. It was a piece of sea glass, green and smooth. I rolled it into my palm. It was cold and made my hand ache. I left it on the windowsill by the sink without meaning to. The way you leave a stone from a beach in a place where it can watch you. Since then, I've written every number true. I don't know if that's bravery or just lack of imagination. The tomb keeps its own records. Sometimes, after a heavy rain, I drive by and see the iron cross fogging at the edges, like someone is talking softly behind the door. Sometimes I see kids daring each other to touch the granite and I slow down and roll my window down and say, "Don't." And they laugh, because I am a man in a car and they are kids at the edge of the world, and saying "don't" is what men in cars do. Here's the last thing, and it's small, but it's what keeps me up. A week ago, my mother asked for a glass of water in the middle of the night. She was hot, she said. I brought it to her and she drank half and handed it back with her eyes closed and said, "Tastes like pennies," and went to sleep. I stood there in the dark holding the glass and listening to the house breathe and to a sound beneath the house that I can only describe as a shift. Not a crash, not a groan, a settling like something choosing its place. In the morning, I found the sea glass on the windowsill had left a little ring on the paint where it had sweated. I wiped it off with the dishcloth. Then I put the sea glass in my pocket, because it felt wrong to leave it where it could watch my mother eat toast. I'm not asking for advice. I'm not trying to sell this as a ghost story. I'm writing it down because records matter. People pretend buildings are just buildings, but houses want heat and barns want hay, and some things made of stone want to be where the water is. You can chain them and jack them and bid them stay. You can put your flashlight under the door so you feel brave enough to step inside. In the end, you tell the truth about where they are. And if the door ever opens for you, if you smell the tide where there shouldn't be any, don't wedge it. Don't prop it for your return like you're the one who makes the rules. Put your light in your pocket and back out and count your steps and let whatever is measuring keep its own notes. Because it will, it has, and the marsh keeps excellent time.